Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never thought I'd be afraid to stand in my own hallway in the middle of the night, but that's exactly where I find myself these days. Torn between checking for intruders and worrying that I might be dealing with something I can't explain. My name is Chris, I'm 32, and I live alone in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building from the 1960s. The place has creaky wooden floors, a small kitchen, a tight living room, and a single bedroom with an even tinier bathroom attached. I've been here for about 4 years, and until recently, I never had any reason to question my peace of mind. Now, every time I turn off the lights, I see a quick shadow move down the hallway. It's like a small figure crouched low, dashing by so fast that I can only catch it out of the corner of my eye. When it started, I brushed it off as headlights from outside. The street below has a moderate amount of traffic at night, and sometimes the lights shine through the windows. I assumed the weird shape I noticed in the corridor was just a beam of light. But then one night I realized there were no cars passing at that moment. Everything was quiet, and I still saw a shape flit across the hallway. It was dark and fast, about the height of someone crouching close to the floor, and it disappeared around the corner toward the bathroom. I got up from the couch, turned on all the lights, and found nothing. The hallway was empty, the bathroom was empty, and the bedroom was exactly how I left it. I tried to be logical about it. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, or maybe I was exhausted. I had worked a few late shifts that month, so I figured I might be so tired that I was imagining things. I told myself I just needed to get more sleep. But then it happened again, and again. Each time the shape looked the same, like a black silhouette moving low to the ground, always headed in the same direction. It crept me out enough that I decided to keep the lights on in the hallway at night. If there was a real person sneaking around, I wanted to see them clearly. If it was my imagination, I wanted bright lights to reassure me there was nothing to worry about. The first night I slept with the hallway light on, I woke up around 3 in the morning, thirsty. I remember walking out of my bedroom and heading for the kitchen. My apartment was silent. I flicked the light switch in the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. On my way back, I caught a glimpse of something move at the end of the hallway. It was that same shape, low to the ground, sliding toward the bathroom door. My heart jumped. I froze for a second and felt this tightening in my chest, like a sudden jolt of adrenaline. I forced myself to walk down the hall. I opened the bathroom door, flipped on the light. Nothing there. The bathroom is tiny. Just a toilet, sink, and a small shower stall. There's nowhere to hide. I even pulled back the shower curtain. Nothing. After that night, I started questioning every little noise. Whenever I was home alone, I swore I heard faint footfalls in the corridor, like someone stepping carefully on the wood, trying not to make a sound. I'd lie in bed, my ears perked up, waiting for another step. Some nights I'd hear a slight creak, then silence. Other nights I'd hear 2 or 3 consecutive soft steps, like someone walking slowly. I would switch on the bedside lamp and stare at the crack of light under the bedroom door, waiting to see if a shadow would pass by. More often than not, I convinced myself I was just scaring myself over nothing. But deep down, I knew something was off. I decided to invite a friend over to hang out and see if he noticed anything strange. My friend Mark came by. We watched a game on TV, ordered pizza, and talked about work. Mark stayed until around midnight, and nothing happened. Not a single flicker of movement, not a single weird noise. The hallway remained still. I even had the lights off part of the evening to show him what I was dealing with. But there was no shadow. That made me doubt my sanity even more. Mark left with a smirk, telling me that old buildings do weird things sometimes. He reminded me that I'd once complained about the pipes making strange noises. I guess he thought I was mixing up normal apartment quirks with my imagination. The next night I was alone again, and that's when things escalated. I heard a distinct creaking sound right outside my bedroom door while I was in bed. It wasn't just a random building noise. It sounded like weight shifting on the wooden floor. My body tensed up. My breathing got shallow. I got out of bed slowly and grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand. I opened the door and shined the flashlight into the hallway. The overhead light was still on, so I had a clear view. I saw nothing. But as I stood there scanning the corridor, I heard a soft thump in the living room. My heart felt like it was pounding in my throat. I checked the living room. It was empty. Everything was where it should be. The next morning I woke up and found my wallet on the kitchen counter. That might not sound strange, but I never leave my wallet there. I keep it on the side table next to the couch, and I didn't remember moving it. I'm typically careful with my wallet, so I was confused. I tried to recall if maybe I'd come home, tossed it on the counter, and forgotten. But I was pretty sure I'd set it down in its usual place. I shrugged it off, but it left a nagging feeling in my gut. Over the next few days, objects started appearing in random spots. My TV remote ended up on top of the fridge one evening. Another time, I found my house keys inside a cabinet in the bathroom. I'd unlock the door, set my keys on the coffee table, and later discover them in places I'd never put them. I even started double-checking everything after I used it. I'd confirm in my mind, okay, I put the keys here. Then later, they'd be gone. Each time I felt this growing sense of unease. I wondered if I was sleepwalking. I considered that maybe I was experiencing stress or depression and doing things without remembering. That worried me more than the idea of a shadow in the hallway. At one point, I decided to see if there was any sign of forced entry. I inspected my front door. The lock looked fine. The door jamb wasn't damaged. The windows were all secure. Nothing seemed out of place except for the strange positioning of my personal items. I thought about installing a better lock or even a small security camera, but part of me hesitated. I couldn't shake the idea that maybe this wasn't a normal break-in situation. I tried to calm down by going about my routine. I'd come home from work, take a shower, eat dinner, watch some TV, and go to bed. But the hallway never felt comfortable anymore. I'd walk through it and feel this pressure in my chest like I was being watched. It's not dramatic or cinematic. It's just a dull, constant tension that made me sweat a little. Sometimes I'd clear my throat or deliberately make noise to break the silence. On nights when I was especially on edge, I'd call someone on my phone just to have a human voice in my ear while I walked to the bathroom or kitchen. A couple of weeks into this, I reached my limit. I was lying in bed about to doze off when I heard steps in the hallway again. This time, they were heavier than before. I bolted upright and flicked on my bedside lamp. My heart was hammering. I forced myself to push the covers aside, stand up, and open the bedroom door. I expected to see something in the corridor, but it was just an empty, lit hallway. My breath was shaky, and my hands were clammy. I listened carefully and heard a quiet shuffling sound at the far end near the living room. I took a step forward. The floor under my feet creaked loudly. Then I heard what sounded like a soft scamper, almost like someone scurrying away. I walked faster and turned on every light. The living room was empty. I checked the closet near the front door. Nothing. I opened every cupboard in the kitchen. Nothing. By the time I was done, I was sweating. I felt stupid, but also terrified. That's when I noticed the TV remote on the dining table. I remembered seeing it on the couch just before bed. I had only turned the TV off and left it on the seat cushion. Now it was on the table. I stood there, staring at it. I didn't know if I should laugh at how ridiculous it seemed or freak out. I ended up leaning on the kitchen counter, trying to calm my breathing. I felt my pulse throbbing in my neck. I kept telling myself there had to be a normal explanation. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, nothing made sense. I started considering that my building was old and maybe had a secret crawl space or something. I looked around for any attic openings. There was only a small hatch in the ceiling of the hallway for access to the building's wiring. It's locked with a latch, and I've never seen it open. I also thought about the basement. I only go down there to do laundry, and it's a shared space for the whole building. There are no direct passages to individual apartments from there. After talking to a neighbor or two, I realized nobody had reported break-ins or odd activities. They looked at me like I was overreacting. Some joked that the building is old and spooky, but they'd never experienced anything like this. I asked if they heard anything at night. They said no. One neighbor mentioned hearing me pacing around sometimes, but that's it. Another night, I took a different approach. I turned off most of the lights but left my phone camera recording video on a small tripod in the hallway, pointing toward the living room. I thought maybe I'd catch something. I sat in the bedroom in the dark, door cracked open, watching the corridor from my bed. After a while, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was almost 5 a.m. I checked my phone. It had recorded about 3 hours. I skimmed through the footage, but it was mostly just me entering and leaving the room or faintly hearing noises. At around 2 hours into the recording, I saw a flicker, like a small shadow darting across the bottom edge of the frame. It was just a glimpse, but it looked similar to what I'd been seeing. I paused it, rewound it multiple times, but it was too dark and too quick to be certain. It gave me chills. My hands were shaking. I was sure I'd caught at least part of that shape on camera. Now I'm at the point where I'm torn between hiring a locksmith or an exorcist. That sounds extreme, but I have no idea what's going on. I don't want to sound like I've lost it, but I also can't keep living with this tension every single night. This morning, I spent 20 minutes looking for my wallet. I found it on the windowsill in the bedroom. That windowsill is dusty and cluttered with old receipts, so I know I didn't put it there. I took it as a sign that this thing, whatever it is, has no problem messing with me during the day as well. I've thought about moving, but my lease isn't up for another 6 months. It's not easy for me to just pack up and break a lease. Also, part of me wants answers. If there's a real person sneaking in, I have to figure out how and why. If there's something else at play, I need to confront it, or at least understand it. I'm planning to call a locksmith tomorrow. I want to replace the lock on the front door and maybe install a deadbolt. That's the practical step. But I'm also thinking about placing motion detectors or alarms in the hallway. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that to my friends, though. I can already imagine them teasing me. Right now, it's late, and I'm writing all of this at the kitchen table with every light in the apartment turned on. I keep glancing at the hallway. My legs are jittery and I feel that edge in my stomach. I can't help but listen for footsteps. I want to believe this is all some bizarre stress reaction, or that I've been absent-mindedly moving my own stuff. But I keep circling back to the feeling that I'm not alone here. I haven't told anyone else in detail because I don't want people thinking I'm paranoid or messing around with the supernatural. Yet, deep inside, I think something beyond normal might be happening in this old building. So that's where I'm at right now, stuck between a standard lock fix or admitting there's an invisible roommate playing tricks on me. I'm just hoping that whatever is going on, it doesn't escalate any further. I can handle missing keys and wallets placed on strange surfaces, but the idea of seeing that crouched shape in full view, right in front of me, makes my chest tighten. I don't know what I'll do if it stands up one night and walks right toward me. I'm just trying to keep calm and deal with this one step at a time. Tomorrow I call the locksmith. Tonight I leave every single light on. And I'll keep my phone in my hand, just in case. I moved into this house about 3 months ago. I found it on a real estate site and the rent was cheap. It's a small, single-story place on a quiet street. There's a playground right next door. During the day, it looks normal enough. Swings, a slide, a seesaw, and a couple of benches. At night, though, there's almost no light. A few dim bulbs line the path, but they barely illuminate anything. I'm 40, recently divorced, and wanted a fresh start somewhere calm. I expected some peace and quiet. Instead, I got nights filled with the sound of voices that I can't explain. On my first night here, I was unpacking boxes in the living room. It was late, around 11. The windows in this house are thin, so I can hear everything outside, even footsteps from people walking on the sidewalk. At one point, I heard what sounded like kids laughing. It caught me off guard because it was freezing that evening, and I couldn't imagine anyone hanging around in the dark. I turned off the music I had playing on my phone and listened. There it was again. The sound of high-pitched giggling, like kids chasing each other on a playground. I walked to the window and looked outside. The street was empty. No one was at the playground. The swings were still. The slide was just a silhouette. But I could still hear those voices. They sounded close. I shrugged it off, telling myself it might be teenagers messing around. Maybe they were hanging out just out of sight. I went back to unpacking and tried to ignore it. Over the next week, I heard the same sounds every night. Always around 11, always the same faint laughter and chatter. Sometimes I thought I heard the chains of a swing rattling. Other times I thought I heard footsteps shuffling in the dirt. Each time I looked out the window, though, I saw nothing. I even went outside a couple of times. The air was cold and I couldn't see a single person, but I still heard the voices. They seemed to echo right in front of me, like they were passing me by. It made the hair on my arm stand up. One night I got sick of it. It had been a rough day. Work was stressful, and I just wanted to sleep. The clock read 11:05, and I heard that same soft laughter. I snapped. I grabbed a jacket, walked out the front door, and marched straight to the playground. The temperature had dropped, and my breath left visible clouds. I listened. The laughter sounded so clear I would have sworn someone was right there in front of me, but the playground was empty. I walked around the swings. I checked behind the slide. I even took out my phone's flashlight and scanned every corner. No one was there. I'm not the type who scares easily, but I felt uneasy. The air had a stillness that made my skin crawl. The voices got quieter, then faded into absolute silence. I stood there, my breath heavy, my ears straining for any hint of movement. Nothing. I went back inside, locked the door, and turned on every light in the living room. I didn't sleep well that night. My dreams were filled with echoing giggles and dark shapes moving behind me. I woke up with my heart pounding more than once. For the next few weeks, the voices continued. They never missed a night. It didn't matter if it was raining or if the wind was howling. Sometimes the temperature dropped so low that frost appeared on my lawn in the morning, but the voices never stopped. It was always around 11. The sound would last anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour. Then it would vanish. After about a month, I decided to bring someone else into this. My younger brother, Martin, offered to stay over for a few nights. He thought I was overreacting. He teased me on the phone, saying maybe I just needed better insulation or that it might be stray cats or raccoons. He arrived on a Friday. We spent the evening having a few beers and talking about life. Around 10:30, I could feel my pulse start to race. I kept glancing at the clock. Martin noticed and said, "You okay?" I told him to wait and listen. Right on time, the voices started. Martin froze. He turned off the TV and looked around. I could tell from his face that he heard it too. The sound of giggling drifted through the window. It was faint but noticeable. We both stared at each other, and then Martin walked over to the window and looked out. Nothing. I told him, "It gets louder if you go outside." He shook his head, but I could see curiosity on his face. We stepped onto the porch together. Outside, the night felt colder than usual. Martin flipped on the porch light, but it barely lit the driveway. The laughter was still there. It sounded like a small group of voices. They seemed playful, with occasional hushed whispers and excited chatter. Martin walked toward the fence that separated my yard from the playground. I followed. My breath felt shallow and my hands were clammy. I couldn't see a single person near the swings or the seesaw, but I heard that soft sound, as if they were right in front of us. Martin whispered, "Where the hell is this coming from?" I shrugged. The voices floated around us and then faded just like that. Martin and I stood there in silence for a while. Then we headed back inside and locked the door. He looked spooked. He was breathing a little fast. He said, "I don't think you're nuts. This is weird." We ended up staying up until 2 in the morning, trying to figure out some logical explanation. We considered echoes from another street, or maybe some audio trick caused by the layout of the houses. But the playground is surrounded by residential streets and big old trees. There's no reason the sound would be so focused right there, and it's always so specific. Laughter, murmured voices, and sometimes that chain swing clink. Martin left on Sunday, saying he didn't have an answer for me. He just told me to keep my phone ready and record it next time. The following week, I tried to record the sounds with my phone. I went outside at 11, hovered near the fence, and waited. The giggling started soft at first, growing a bit louder. My phone's mic picked up the faint noise, but it sounded distorted. When I listened to the playback later, I could barely make out anything except static and a few odd tones. It wasn't enough to prove anything to anyone. At that point, I thought about calling the police. But what was I supposed to say? That I heard voices in an empty playground? They'd either laugh at me or think I was pranking them. There was no sign of actual trespassing. The fence was intact and none of the equipment had any vandalism. There were no footprints in the dirt, at least none that looked fresh. I felt stuck. Then one night, I made the mistake of looking out my window for too long. It was close to midnight and the laughter had just died down. I was staring at the swings, trying to see if they'd move on their own or something. All of a sudden, I noticed a shape near the slide. It was low to the ground, maybe the height of a small person. It moved between the slide and the seesaw. My heart pounded. I could feel sweat on my forehead. My hands trembled a bit as I reached for the light switch next to the window. I turned off the living room light to get a better view outside. The shape drifted from one piece of equipment to the next. I couldn't make out details, just a dark outline. It moved in a quick, jerky way, like it wasn't walking but gliding. I blinked hard. I wanted to believe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But it was still there. Suddenly it vanished. I scanned the playground, leaning closer to the window. There was nothing left but shadows. My heart was racing. My mouth felt dry. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept listening for more laughter or footsteps. But after that sighting, there was only silence. The next day, I woke up with a headache from barely resting. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept returning to that shape. Each night I grew more afraid of looking out the window. I'd hear the voices, but I stayed in bed, eyes closed, trying not to let my imagination run wild. The nights got colder, sometimes with freezing rain, but the voices never failed to show up. I told Martin about the shape I saw. He didn't know what to say. He joked that maybe I should move again, but I didn't find it funny. I've got a year lease here and I'm not made of money. Plus, something in me wanted to figure this out. I'm not a believer in ghosts or any of that. I don't go looking for paranormal stuff. But this situation started making me doubt my own logic. Every time the laughter echoed at 11, I felt a tightness in my chest, like I was bracing for something to jump out at me. One particularly bad night, the wind was shaking the trees, and a light drizzle fell from the sky. The rustling of branches against each other made the dark yard look even more ominous. I was in the kitchen washing dishes. The clock on the stove clicked to 10:59. My hands tensed around a plate. I knew what was coming. Right on cue, I heard the faint giggles. This time, though, they sounded more frantic. There were quick bursts of laughter followed by excited chatter. It reminded me of people playing a chasing game, except I still couldn't see anyone. I felt goosebumps rise all over my arms. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. I thought about ignoring it and going to bed. Then I remembered how the shape had vanished last time. So I grabbed a flashlight, put on a jacket, and stepped outside. The drizzle was cold. I felt it against my face as I walked across my yard to the fence. The wind tugged at my hood. The laughter seemed to come from the center of the playground near the swings. I shined the flashlight into the darkness. The beam fell on the swings, but they were still. Then I caught a flicker of movement near the seesaw. My light didn't show anything concrete, but I sensed something there. The laughter grew softer, like it was moving away. I took a few more steps, pressing against the fence until my shoulder touched the rough wood. I heard quick footsteps in the dirt, but the ground looked empty. I panned the flashlight back and forth. Nothing. Yet the laughter drifted around me, sometimes louder on my left, sometimes on my right. My chest felt tight, and my hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. My mouth felt bitter. My heart hammered so loudly that I thought it might drown out the sounds. Suddenly, the laughter stopped mid-chuckle. It just cut out. The air went still. The wind died down, and the drizzle almost stopped. I felt like I was in a vacuum. Then I heard a single metallic creak from the swing chains. I pointed my flashlight there again. The seat moved an inch or two, like someone had just hopped off. My eyes burned. I couldn't blink. Nothing was holding that swing. It slowed, then stopped. My breathing felt shallow, and I backed away from the fence, nearly tripping over my own feet. Once I was inside, I locked the door and double-checked the windows. My hands shook when I tried to hang up my jacket. I left it on the floor and stood in the living room with my phone in my hand. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but it was nearly midnight, and I had no idea what to say. I slid down onto the couch and stared at the wall until I calmed down enough to walk to my bedroom. That night, my dreams were full of that creaking swing and the feeling that something was watching me through the windows. I still live here. The sounds haven't gone away. They happen every single night, always around the same time, always with that same playful tone. Sometimes it lasts a few minutes, other times it goes on longer. I keep telling myself there's a reasonable explanation, but I haven't found one. I no longer open the blinds after dark. I keep the curtains drawn and I try to fall asleep before 11. Some nights I manage to ignore the noise. Other nights, I sit in bed with my fingers pressed into my ears. Martin visits once in a while. He still hears the voices if he's here at the right time. He doesn't laugh at me anymore. He suggested I move out, but I can't do that right now. I need a place to live, and this house is all I've got. I sometimes wonder if other neighbors hear the voices, but I don't know them well enough to ask. The few people I've passed on the street never mention anything about the playground at night. They just wave politely and keep walking. I don't have any proof that something's wrong here. All I have are these weird recordings full of static, my own experiences, and Martin's word. But every night around 11, I still hear that laughter. It's not loud, but it's enough to make the back of my neck prickle. I think about going out there again, about shining a flashlight around and yelling for whoever, or whatever it is to leave. But the last time I did that, I saw that dark shape, and that was enough for me. Now I stay in bed and try not to think about it. I count the seconds until it stops. Sometimes I pinch my arm to stay grounded, telling myself this is real, and I'm not just imagining it. When it finally fades, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The nights feel endless, but morning always comes, and when the sun rises, the playground looks normal again. It's a bunch of old equipment, a fenced border, and a patch of dirt that could use some grass. I don't know if this place is haunted or if there's some bizarre acoustic phenomenon happening. I just know I hear voices every night, and I see shapes that shouldn't be there. I can't explain it, and neither can Martin. Nobody else has complained, so I don't have any backup from the neighbors. So far, nothing has hurt me. I try to keep it that way by leaving it alone. I still hope one day I'll step outside at 11 and find an actual group of people playing a prank. At least that would be normal. But I've already checked. I've looked, and there's no one there. The laughter seems to come from thin air, and the shapes move without any explanation. It's a strange reality to live with, but this is my life now. Every night at 11, the playground next door fills with voices I can't see, and every night I stay inside and wait for them to disappear. That's how it is, and that's how it's probably going to stay for the rest of my lease. I felt uneasy the moment I hung that old painting in my living room. My heart rate sped up and my palms started to sweat when I stepped back to look at it. I remember adjusting the frame on the wall and thinking something was off. The figures in the painting appeared so stiff and dark. That was the first night I noticed the boy's eyes, but I brushed it aside. I told myself I was just tired and that I needed to go to sleep. I never imagined how much this painting would change my nights. I'm 27 and I live alone in a 2-story place I bought a few months ago. It's not too big, just enough space for me. I inherited the painting after my father passed. I didn't question it. It was always in my father's living room when I visited him. The painting shows my great-grandparents and their family. They all look serious, almost grim. The background is dark and the paint is thick in some spots. I can smell a faint old oil smell whenever I stand near it. I decided to hang it in my living room over the couch. It brought back some memories of my father, and I thought it would be a nice way to keep a piece of the family history with me. Things felt normal at first. I would glance at the painting every now and then. Sometimes I'd notice how worn the edges are or see a small crack in the paint near my great-grandfather's left shoulder. I spend most of my evenings downstairs, usually reading or working on my laptop at the dining table, which is just a few steps away from the couch. The living room is part of this open floor plan, so the painting is always in view if I look up. During the day, it's just there, a dusty old piece of family history. At night, though, it changes the mood of the entire space. About a week after I hung it, I started to feel like something was off. It was a random Tuesday night, around 11 p.m. I was reading over some work documents and had a small lamp on. The rest of the room was dim. I felt this weird pressure on my shoulders, like I was being watched. My neck tensed, and I stopped reading. My eyes moved toward the painting. It was the same painting, same dark clothing on all those figures, but I locked onto the youngest boy in the front. My heart skipped for a second. It looked like he was staring back at me. That was strange because I remembered the boy's gaze being angled slightly away, as if he was looking to the side. Now it felt like he was focused on me. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes. I chalked it up to poor lighting, or my own fatigue. I went to bed soon after, but I felt tense the whole time I walked up the stairs. The next night, I didn't even look at the painting. I sat at my dining table again, went through my notes, tried to keep my focus on the laptop screen. But out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that same shadowy shape on the wall. I started to sweat again. My legs felt restless, and I kept adjusting my position in the chair. Eventually, I got up to turn on the overhead light. The living room lit up, and the painting didn't look as menacing. Everything seemed normal. I shook off the unease and went back to work until around 1 a.m. Then I headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. I had to pass through the living room right in front of that painting. The overhead light was still on, so I figured I wouldn't feel so anxious. But as I stepped in front of it, my chest tightened, and I felt a cold chill on my arms. It was like standing under an air conditioning vent, except my AC was off. The boy's eyes looked different again. It was the same posture, the same clothes, but the expression looked sharper, more focused. I felt a lump in my throat. I stood there for a few seconds, holding my breath, then I forced myself to keep walking. I hurried to the kitchen, gulped down some water, and then rushed upstairs to my bedroom without looking back. That night I didn't sleep well. I tossed and turned, and every time I opened my eyes, I pictured the boy's stare. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I made sure I kept the main lights on whenever I was downstairs. If I had to pass by the painting late at night, I turned on every light in the room first. I felt a bit silly, but I told myself it was better than feeling creeped out in my own house. Each night, though, the sensation got heavier. Whenever I walked through the living room, I sensed someone watching me. I didn't hear anything at that point, but my body was reacting. My neck would tense, my stomach would twist, and my breathing would quicken. It felt like a small panic attack every time I glanced at that painting. I wanted to take it down, but part of me felt guilty. It was my father's painting. I also thought maybe I was just spooking myself. I decided to endure it for a bit longer. Then the noises started. It happened on a Friday around midnight. I was half asleep on the couch, flipping through channels with the TV's volume low. I thought I heard a soft creak, like a floorboard shifting. My wooden floors do creak sometimes, but usually only when I step on certain spots. This was different. It came from right in front of the painting. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I muted the TV. I listened hard, but everything else was silent. I turned the TV off and stood up. My legs felt shaky, and I had this tightness in my stomach. I took a step toward the painting. Another creak. It sounded like a slow footstep on an old plank. I stopped moving and held my breath. The floor under my feet wasn't making any sound, but about 3 feet in front of me, I heard another subtle creak. It was as if something was standing there. My throat went dry. I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. I could barely swallow. I switched on the closest lamp, and as the light spread over the room, the sound stopped. The painting remained on the wall, the figures in their usual positions. I let out a shaky exhale. My hands were trembling. I walked up to the painting, stared at the boy's face, and tried to see if there was any real change in the paint. I couldn't see anything obvious, but that didn't ease my nerves. I decided to call it a night. I left the downstairs lights on and went upstairs. I barely slept. The next day I tried to approach this logically. I got a small level tool to check if the painting had shifted on the hook, maybe giving me an illusion that the eyes had moved. But it was level. I looked for any cracks or distortions. I ran my fingers along the frame, checked the back. There was some old writing that I couldn't read, probably a date or some note from the artist. Then I inspected the front with a small flashlight. The brush strokes on the faces were thick, but they looked the same as I remembered. The boys' eyes were angled to the side, not directly at me. Yet at night, they always seemed to shift. I tested the overhead lights and the table lamp, trying to see if a certain angle caused a reflection that changed the appearance. I couldn't replicate what I had seen. That afternoon, I seriously considered taking the painting down and storing it away. I felt that might be disrespectful, but I hated this growing tension in my own house. That evening, I left the painting where it was, but I told myself I'd see how it went. I cooked a quick dinner, watched a show on my laptop, and avoided looking at the painting. I only stole a glance here and there just to check. By about 1 a.m. I was feeling tired, so I went to get a glass of water. This time, as I passed the painting, I noticed the boy's face again. My breathing caught in my throat. His expression was definitely not the same. His lips seemed slightly parted, and his eyes looked more intense. I froze. I felt like my feet were stuck to the floor. A sudden wave of fear hit my stomach like a punch from inside. My arms felt cold and my head started pounding. I kept staring for maybe 5 seconds. Then I forced myself to take a step backward. My hands were sweating. I grabbed my phone from the couch and turned on its flashlight. I aimed the beam at the painting. Under direct light, it looked just like normal, with the boy's gaze off to the side, his lips pressed together in a stern expression. No parted lips, no direct stare. It was like I had imagined the whole thing, but I could still feel my heart racing. I tapped my phone's screen a few times, making sure the flashlight was steady, but everything looked normal now. I let out a shaky breath. My stomach was in knots. I drank some water in the kitchen, then went upstairs and locked my bedroom door. I had no idea why I locked it, but I felt a need to isolate myself. Over the next week, the sounds continued. Sometimes I heard faint creaks around midnight or 1 a.m., always near the painting. Sometimes they came in slow pairs, like someone taking 2 careful steps. Other times it was just one sudden crack, like wood snapping under pressure. I also started feeling tiny drafts of cold air whenever I was near the painting at night. The house has no major drafts, and the windows are usually closed. But I felt light chills around my arms and shoulders. At one point, I stood in front of the painting in broad daylight, trying to see if there was any gap in the wall that could cause airflow. I found none. The wall behind the painting felt solid, no cracks or openings. I felt silly, but I was desperate to find a practical reason for these experiences. As the noises got more frequent, my nerves got worse. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a small lamp on my nightstand. I found myself dreading any trip downstairs after dark. I began double-checking the locks on every window and door before the sun went down, not because I thought someone was breaking in, but because I felt safer with everything shut tight. Each time I went to the kitchen at night, I felt my throat tighten when I passed the painting. It was as if the air in the living room was heavier, pressing on my chest. One night, I decided to record a video with my phone. It was around midnight, and I heard the floor creaking again. I was on the couch, half dozing, but I snapped awake when I heard those soft footsteps. My heart started pounding. I fumbled for my phone, opened the camera, and pressed record. I kept the lights off except for the soft glow of a small lamp in the corner. The living room was dim, but I could see the painting. I aimed my phone at it, hoping to capture the sound. I was shaking. My breath was shallow, and my back felt tense. I heard a faint click of wood, like a joint in the floor settling. Through my phone's screen, the painting looked the same. I zoomed in on the boy's face. I couldn't see any change, just the shadow of his hair and the pale outlines of his eyes. Then I heard a louder creak right in front of me and my chest tightened. I stopped the recording and jumped to my feet. I fumbled for the main light switch. Once the light was on, everything went still. I played back the video, but I only heard muffled sounds. It wasn't clear at all. I didn't see the eyes move or the expression change. I looked around the room, feeling frustrated and scared at the same time. At that point, I seriously considered removing the painting. I thought of giving it to another relative or just storing it in the attic. But I worried that I'd offend someone in the family, or that I would regret it later. I decided to move it temporarily. That same night, I took it off the living room wall. My heart was racing while I lifted it off the hook. The old frame felt heavier in my hands than I expected. I carried it upstairs and placed it in the spare bedroom closet. I leaned it against the back wall and closed the door. I wanted it out of sight. I felt a tiny wave of relief flow through my chest once I stepped back into the hallway. It was almost 2 a.m. by then, and I was exhausted. For the next few nights, I noticed the living room felt lighter. I didn't hear the creaks anymore. I didn't feel the chills. I started falling asleep on the couch again, watching late-night TV or reading. My appetite improved and my shoulders felt more relaxed. It was as if a weight had lifted from the house. But at the same time, every now and then, I thought I heard a faint sound upstairs. I told myself it was just the normal settling of the house or the wind outside. I tried not to think about the painting in the closet. About a week after I moved it, I was in my bedroom around midnight. I was half asleep when I heard a soft click from somewhere in the hallway. It sounded like a door handle. My heart jumped, and I sat up in bed. My mouth went dry, and I listened for any more sounds. I waited for maybe 30 seconds. Then I heard the closet door in the spare room creak. It was a slow, strained noise, like the hinges were moving. I swung my legs out of bed and just sat there staring at my closed bedroom door. My mind raced. I didn't want to open my door. I didn't want to see if something had changed. My body tensed up and I felt cold sweat on my forehead. I waited. It might have been a draft, or maybe the door wasn't latched properly. I told myself that over and over, but I couldn't relax. Finally, after a minute or two, I forced myself to stand. My legs were weak, and my hands shook. I opened my bedroom door and looked into the hallway. It was dark, so I switched on the hallway light. Everything looked still. I walked slowly to the spare room. The door was shut. I reached out and turned the knob. It felt stiff, but it opened. The closet door was slightly ajar. My pulse hammered in my ears. I stepped forward and pulled the closet door open. There was the painting, exactly where I left it, leaned against the back wall. The boy's face stared at me from the canvas. My stomach twisted. I shut the closet door firmly, making sure it latched this time. I left the spare room and closed that door too. My lungs felt tight. I went downstairs, grabbed a bottle of water, and stood there in my kitchen thinking about everything. The noises, the chills, the shifting eyes. I stayed up until morning, watching random videos on my phone, too scared to sleep. Now, I'm not sure what to do. Part of me wants to call someone in the family and hand the painting off. Another part of me wonders if I should just box it up in the attic or get rid of it altogether. Maybe I'll try to believe it's all in my head, that I'm just reacting to grief or stress. But my body doesn't lie. I've felt the cold drafts, heard the footsteps, seen the eyes shift. I haven't decided yet, but I don't think I can keep it here. Every time I close my eyes, I see that serious face looking right at me. When I walk down the hall, I remember that closet door creaking open. I feel less tense with it upstairs instead of in the living room, but it's still in my house, and that's enough to keep me on edge. Tonight, I plan to seal that closet door with tape, just to see if it moves on its own again. If it does, I might not stay here another night. I just want peace in my own home. My father kept that painting for years, and I never heard him mention anything like this. But I can't pretend things are normal now. Something's different in this house when that painting is present. I can't explain it, and I don't want to deal with it much longer. I need to decide soon. Maybe I'll contact a cousin, tell them I have something from the old family stuff that they might want. Or maybe I'll haul it to the attic and nail the door shut. Right now, I'm just trying to breathe and stay calm, one night at a time, hoping things settle down. And if they don't, I'll get rid of that painting for good. I don't care if it's disrespectful. I just want to sleep without feeling like I'm being watched. That's worth more than family relics. I couldn't believe my eyes when I opened the drawer that night and saw the phone's screen lit up. That phone hasn't worked in years. It was my wife's old handset, and I've kept it around because she gave it to me as a present. It has no battery attached anymore, no SIM card, no charger. Yet it glowed, and I swear I saw a message icon on the screen. That's what started everything. I was only looking for an old car registration document, and instead, I found something I can't explain. I'm going to tell you what happened because I can't keep it to myself anymore. I'm just hoping you'll believe me. The moment I saw the phone screen lit up, my heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. The drawer was half open. The rest of the bedroom was dark except for a small lamp on my nightstand. My breathing turned shallow. I reached into the drawer, and my hand trembled as I picked up the phone. The screen displayed one single notification, a text message. No sender name, no timestamp, nothing. I tapped the screen and it opened a blank messaging app with just the word, "Hello." That was it. The phone was still in my wife's old settings. No updates, no fancy interface. It looked exactly like it did years ago. I froze right there, leaning against my dresser, phone in hand. My mouth felt dry. I tried to think logically. Maybe I had left a small charge in the battery. Maybe the phone had some glitch. But I knew it was impossible because the battery was missing. I removed it before storing the phone, worried about corrosion or leaking. So how was it lit up? I turned the phone off right away. My thumb pressed the power button, and the screen went dark. I felt slightly better once it was off. I placed it on top of my dresser and stood there for a minute, wondering if I was losing my mind. I decided to put it in the living room the next day, in a different drawer, just to be safe. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I grabbed my document, closed the dresser, and tried to sleep. But that was the beginning of a series of strange things that followed. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I went about my normal routine: coffee, shower, breakfast. My mind kept drifting back to the phone. Around lunchtime, I heard a faint sound from the bedroom. It was that short, classic beep from old flip phones, kind of a standard message ringtone. But the phone I keep in the bedroom is my normal smartphone, and it has a different tone. I walked into the bedroom. Nothing was on. My smartphone was silent, lying on the bedside table. I realized the beep had sounded familiar in a way that matched my wife's old phone's default tone. I checked anyway. My phone had no notifications. That's when I remembered I had left the old phone on the dresser the night before. I found it right where I left it, powered off. It looked dead. I felt a chill on my arms. I moved it to the living room drawer, trying to convince myself that maybe the beep had come from outside, or maybe a neighbor's phone. I went back to work for the rest of the day. That night, I was restless. I could hear the wind outside. The house felt too quiet. Around 10 p.m., I started hearing that same beep again. Just once, then silence. I turned off the TV. I listened. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it sounded like it was coming from the direction of the living room. My heart rate spiked and my hands got sweaty. I didn't even want to go check, but the curiosity got the better of me. When I reached the living room, the drawer was still shut. I stood there for a few seconds, my hand on the drawer knob. My instincts told me not to open it, but I did it anyway. The phone was there, dark screen, no signs of life. I exhaled. My shoulders relaxed a bit. I closed the drawer and walked back toward the bedroom. Then I heard a soft whisper. It was the faintest sound, like someone saying my name. I spun around so fast I almost tripped. My chest tightened, and I felt goosebumps spread over my neck. I waited, listening hard. Nothing. The living room was dimly lit by a single lamp by the couch, so I could see that nobody was there. The whisper had sounded like my wife's voice. That made no sense. She's been gone for a long time. I tried to rationalize it as my imagination. Stress, maybe. I headed back to bed, but I couldn't sleep until after 2 a.m. The following days, the beeps got more frequent. Sometimes I'd be in the kitchen making dinner, and I'd hear that old phone ringtone. I'd rush to the living room or wherever I stored the phone at the time, but the screen would be dark by the time I arrived. Other times, I'd swear I heard a muffled voice coming from the next room. A short whisper, a single syllable. I always thought it sounded like my wife calling me by the nickname she used. Every time I froze. Every time I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. After about a week, I decided to test the phone. I put the battery back in, which I had stored in a separate box. The battery was dead as a brick. I tried plugging it into a charger. No response. The phone wouldn't power on. The screen stayed black. I left it charging for an hour, thinking maybe I could show a friend or someone that it wasn't working. But it never turned on when I pressed the button. Then, 2 nights later, I saw it glow again when it wasn't even plugged in. That made me feel lightheaded. I had to sit down on the couch to steady myself. I started hearing that beep in the middle of the night, too. I'd wake up, my heart thudding, that beep echoing in my ears. Sometimes I'd think I heard footsteps in the hallway, just 1 or 2 steps. Sometimes I felt like something moved in the corner of my vision. I turned the lights on, paced around, checked the locks, and found nothing. My nerves were on edge. My appetite got worse. I couldn't focus on anything. One evening I stayed up late in the living room with all the lights on, determined to catch the phone lighting up. I wanted to see it happen in real time. Around midnight I got up to get some water. As I walked back in, I saw the drawer's handle jiggle slightly. I stopped. My pulse drummed in my ears. My mouth went dry. I took a deep breath and opened the drawer. The phone screen was lit, bright in the darkness of the drawer. The message icon was on the screen. I picked it up with shaking hands. No battery, no SIM, no charger. But the phone was definitely on. I opened the message app. This time there was more text. It said, "Hello? Are you there?" Still no sender, no date, no time. My stomach clenched. My mind raced. I thought of my wife. I felt a pounding in my skull that matched the racing of my heart. I stood there, phone in hand, for what felt like minutes. Then the screen went dark and I couldn't turn it on again. I wanted to throw it against the wall, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was hers. I kept telling myself I can't destroy a gift she gave me. The next few days I tried to ignore everything. But the beeps and the whispers kept happening. I found myself talking to the phone sometimes, asking if someone was there. I'd sit on my couch with the phone in front of me, its black screen mocking me. No answer, no light. But later I'd hear the beep from the bedroom or from the kitchen or even from the bathroom while I showered. Every time the phone would appear to be off whenever I checked. Eventually I tried taking the phone to the garage. I put it in a box with some old tools, closed the lid, and left it. I went back to the house and tried to occupy my time. A few hours later I heard a faint beep coming from the walls. It felt like it was right behind me. I jumped and almost dropped a glass of water. My heart felt like it was shaking in my chest. I ran to the garage and opened the box. The phone was lit again. Another text. This time it read, "Please respond." I stared at it in disbelief. My hands trembled. I tapped on the screen, but nothing happened. It froze there for a moment. Then it went dark again. I remember gripping the edges of the box, trying not to panic. My wife's voice echoed in my head. The word "respond" stayed with me. I took the phone out, returned to the house, and placed it on the coffee table. I sat across from it, arms resting on my knees. like I was about to interrogate it. My breathing was shallow. A drop of sweat ran down the side of my face. I waited, eyes locked on that phone. Nothing happened for a long while. Eventually, I tried to sleep, but the minute I lay down, I swore I heard a whisper saying, "Talk to me." That's exactly how my wife used to speak when she wanted me to share something. I shot upright and grabbed my flashlight. I walked around the house, checking each room. The phone was still on the coffee table, dark screen, silent. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. For the next few days, it was the same routine. Random beeps, occasional whispers. One night, while I was brushing my teeth, I heard a long buzzing noise from the living room. It sounded like the old phone vibrating on a hard surface. I spat out my toothpaste, dashed into the living room, and saw the phone sliding an inch or two across the coffee table, as if it was actively receiving a call or a message. My eyes widened. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I picked it up. The screen was glowing, but there was no text. Then I heard a short exhale near my ear, almost like a sigh. I dropped the phone on the couch and stumbled back, gasping. I wanted to confide in someone, but I was afraid they'd say I was going crazy. I only told one close friend. He laughed it off, told me it was probably just a leftover battery charge in my imagination. I didn't argue, because I didn't have any evidence to convince him otherwise. All I had were these horrifying moments alone with that phone. I felt more isolated as the days went by. One afternoon, I decided to try burying the phone in a box full of old clothes in the back of my closet. I thought maybe out of sight, out of mind. I taped the box shut, stacked a few other boxes on top, and shut the closet. I put on some music to distract myself. 2 hours later, I heard the old phone ringtone again. It was so close, like it was right behind me. I turned off the music, my ears were ringing from adrenaline. I opened the closet. The stack of boxes was undisturbed, but the ringtone kept going. I tore open the tape, pulled out the phone, and found the screen glowing again. Another message. "Why are you ignoring me?" My legs went weak. I had to lean against the wall. I stared at the phone, my heart in my throat. I finally decided to speak to it out loud. I just said, "I'm sorry." My voice cracked. The screen faded to black. I set the phone on top of the box. I felt a weight in my chest that wouldn't go away. Every hair on my arm stood up. I stood there for a while, waiting. No beep came. No whisper. The phone stayed dark. But that night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a soft voice by my bed. It said my name in the exact tone my wife used on Sunday mornings, the way she'd try to wake me up gently. I bolted upright, panting. The room was dark except for the glow of the clock on my nightstand. I listened. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. Then I heard the beep again, muffled like it was in the closet. I couldn't move. My forehead was damp with sweat. My arms felt cold. Eventually, I forced myself out of bed and walked to the closet. The phone was in my jacket pocket somehow. I don't remember putting it there. The screen was lit, showing another message. "Answer me." No date, no time, no sender. I pressed a few buttons. Nothing happened. I pressed the power button. The screen went dark again. I locked the phone in a small metal box I used to store spare keys. I took that box outside and put it in my car trunk. I tried sleeping, but each time I drifted off, I heard that faint beep or that quiet whisper calling my name. My pulse kept racing. I was sweating through my sheets. When morning came, I drove a few miles away and sat in a parking lot, staring at the locked box in my trunk. I was shaking with anxiety. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to throw it in a dumpster or smash it. Something about that felt wrong. It was my wife's phone. But I also couldn't keep living like this. I ended up driving back home. I brought the phone inside, put it in a small drawer in the living room, and stood there waiting. Eventually, I heard the beep again. I opened the drawer. The phone's screen showed a new message. "I need you to listen." My eyes burned with tears I was trying not to shed. My chest felt tight. I said out loud, I'm listening. Nothing else happened. No more messages appeared. That's where I'm at now. I still hear the beeps, maybe once a day, sometimes more. I still find the phone lit up with strange messages. Sometimes it's just, hello. Other times it's, why won't you talk, or I'm here. I can't explain it. I don't know if it's her. I don't know if something else is trying to get my attention. All I know is that I can't throw it away. I can't smash it. I can't bury it and pretend it's gone. I'm stuck with it. I go through my daily life the best I can, but I'm always on edge. I jump at small noises. My hands sweat when I think I hear that old ringtone. Sometimes, late at night, I stand in front of the living room drawer and just wait. Occasionally, I'll open it, see the phone screen lit with some text I can't quite make sense of, and then it goes dark again. I've tried to record it. I've set up my phone camera to see if I can catch the old phone lighting up on its own, but every time I do that, nothing happens. It stays silent until I'm alone with it, or until the camera is off. Then the beep comes back. And sometimes if I listen closely, I swear I can hear my wife calling my name. That's my story. That's everything that's happened so far. I'm telling you because I don't know what else to do. I'm not asking for help exactly. I just need somebody to hear this. I'm living with a phone that refuses to die, sending me messages that no one could possibly send. Part of me wonders if I'll ever get a final message that explains it all. Another part of me is terrified of what I might discover if I keep looking. For now, I'll leave it in the drawer and wait. And sometimes in the middle of the night when I hear that ringtone, I wonder if I should pick it up. But I'm too scared to find out who, or what, might be on the other end. I first heard the footsteps on the night I moved in. They sounded heavy and steady, right above my head like someone was pacing slowly across the roof. It was almost 2 in the morning. I remember checking the clock on my phone because I couldn't sleep. My heart started pounding and my hands got clammy. I tried telling myself it was just some animal or maybe the wind, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like a person was up there. I'll lay out the situation. I manage a small retail store back in my hometown, and I decided I needed a long break. I wanted a quiet place where I could just sit on the beach or maybe fish without a crowd. So I rented a beach house in an area that doesn't get many visitors. The house is a bit old, but it looks sturdy enough. 1 floor, simple layout with a small porch in front. The shoreline is about a 2-minute walk down a short path. There aren't many neighbors. It's almost deserted around here. I thought it would be perfect for some peace and quiet. The day I arrived, I felt excited. I unpacked my groceries, stowed my suitcase in the bedroom, and took a short walk on the beach. The sun was going down, and everything looked calm. There was a cool breeze, and the ocean waves were the only sounds I heard outside. No cars, no people shouting, nothing. I remember thinking, this is going to be the best vacation. Then, around midnight, I climbed into bed. I left one window cracked open to get some fresh air. I dozed off at around 12:30, then woke up because of those footsteps on the roof. The sound was distinct. It moved from one side of the roof to the other, not in a frantic way, more like a slow, methodical walk. A few steps, a pause, then a few more. My eyes snapped open. I sat up in bed, listening, and I could almost feel the sound vibrating in my chest. I got out of bed, walked over to the window, and looked outside. I saw nothing unusual. The yard was empty. The sand around the house looked untouched. I was too jumpy to go outside right then, so I just stood in the dark, trying to figure it out. After maybe 10 minutes, the footsteps stopped. I stayed by the window for a while longer, waiting for something else to happen. I eventually crept back to bed. My heart was still pounding, and it was hard to breathe normally. I felt like I was holding my breath without realizing it. I think I managed to fall asleep again around 3 in the morning. In the morning light, the whole thing seemed less weird. I got up, drank some coffee, and then walked around the outside of the house to check if there was any ladder or easy access point to the roof. There wasn't anything that looked climbable. The walls are pretty plain, and I didn't see any obvious footprints or scuff marks. The sand around the house was undisturbed. just some of my own footprints from the day before. No marks of any other person or animal. Everything looked normal. I shrugged it off and decided it might have been some strange noise carried by the wind or a tree branch scraping somewhere. But there aren't many trees here. It's mostly sand, a few shrubs, and then the beach. Anyway, I let it go and spent the day relaxing. I lay in the sun for a bit, went swimming, and did some reading in the afternoon. The day was quiet, and I started to feel more at ease. That evening, right after dinner, I called the property owner just to ask if there had ever been any break-ins or problems with trespassers. He seemed surprised. He said no one had ever broken in or messed with the place, and he'd never heard of any stories like that. He told me the area was very safe, though a bit isolated. I thanked him and hung up, feeling only half convinced. But I wanted to trust him. He'd seemed friendly when I first arranged the rental. I stayed up a bit later that night, determined to figure out if I'd hear the steps again. I watched some TV. The reception wasn't great, but it helped me pass the time. Around 1 in the morning, I muted the TV and listened. I heard this faint creaking overhead. I thought maybe it was the roof contracting or something. Then, sure enough, I heard those heavy steps again, one after another, almost in a pattern. My heart started racing. My mouth went dry and I could feel my body temperature rising. I was sweating under my shirt. This time I grabbed a flashlight, went outside, and circled the house. I aimed the light at the roof, tried to see if there was any silhouette or shape up there. I saw nothing. The roof looked empty, but I could still hear the footsteps. At one point, it sounded like they paused right above me. I aimed my flashlight directly overhead, but the beam only revealed the edge of the roof and darkness beyond it. I walked around the entire perimeter, shining the light at every angle. I found nothing. Eventually, the noise stopped. I stood there, my hands shaking, until I realized there was nothing I could do at that moment. That's how it went for the next few nights. Each time around 1 or 2 in the morning, I would hear the footsteps. Some nights they were loud, some nights they were softer, but they always sounded like deliberate steps. It felt like someone was walking in slow motion, right above me. On one of those nights, I jumped out of bed as soon as it started and rushed outside. The noise continued for a bit, then stopped by the time I got around to the back of the house. Again, no footprints in the sand, no signs of a ladder, nothing that suggested a person had been there. At that point, I was sleeping with the lights on in the living room, hoping the extra light might scare off whoever or whatever was on the roof. It didn't help. I started feeling jittery in the evenings. My stomach got tense, and I couldn't relax. I found myself pacing inside the house, checking windows, checking doors, making sure everything was locked. I even pushed a small shelf in front of the back door for extra security. A couple of days later, I decided to invite 2 friends over for a small get-together, partly because I wanted some company, partly because I needed to confirm that I wasn't imagining these footsteps. My friends Dave and Lucas arrived in the afternoon. I didn't mention the noises to them. I wanted them to experience it without any prompting. We lit the grill, had some drinks, and everything felt normal. They said the house looked fine, the view was nice, and the isolation was kind of cool. After dark, we moved inside to watch some random show on TV and keep talking. Around 1 in the morning, Dave suddenly turned to me and said, "Hey, do you hear that?" My heart sank. Lucas stood up, looking at the ceiling. We all heard it. Heavy, steady steps on the roof. Dave looked confused. Lucas asked, "Is there an attic or something?" I told them there wasn't. It's just a single-story house with a flat roof. We turned off the TV and listened as the steps moved across the ceiling. We grabbed flashlights and ran outside. The 3 of us spread out around the house, shining lights on the roof. We couldn't see anyone, but the noise kept going for a few more seconds. It was so bizarre. Dave climbed onto the porch railing, trying to get a better angle, but he didn't see anything. Then the footsteps stopped. We tried searching the yard, the porch, around the sides of the house. We found nothing. Dave was pretty rattled. Lucas looked worried and kept saying, "That's messed up, man." We came back inside, locked the door, and stayed up until almost 3 in the morning, waiting to see if it would start again. It didn't. When my friends were leaving the next day, they asked if I was going to be okay staying there alone. I shrugged and said I'd be fine, but inside I felt pretty shaky. Seeing them react to the sound confirmed that I wasn't just hearing things. They heard it too. This was real. I tried to keep my composure, but my mind was racing. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave. Another part of me felt stubborn. I'd paid for this rental, I had a couple of weeks left, and I didn't want to give up that easily. That night I sat in the living room with all the lights on again. The clock ticked closer to 1 gang. My palms got sweaty. My chest felt tight, like I wasn't getting enough air. Sure enough, at around 1:15 I heard the first thump. Then another. Then the slow, steady steps across the ceiling. I could feel the vibrations in the floor, like the roof and the walls were transferring each impact downward. I felt my teeth clench and I started breathing in short gasps. I waited, hoping it would stop, but it kept going. Sometimes it moved in a circle, as if it was going around the perimeter of the roof. Other times it seemed to pass over the same area multiple times. I took a deep breath and went outside with my flashlight once again. Same routine. I walked around the house, aimed the beam at every corner. Nothing. The footsteps seemed to fade away, but not in a way that felt natural. It was like they just vanished, leaving me alone in the silence. Over the next few days, I started dreading the nighttime. I developed a pattern of pacing, checking my phone for the time and getting ready for that first thump. My stomach would twist, my hands would sweat, and I'd feel a slight headache creeping in. Around that time every night, I'd brace myself. Sometimes the noise started at 1 on the dot. Sometimes it waited until closer to 2. A couple of times, I heard what sounded like scratching along the exterior walls, as if the footsteps moved down the sides of the house. But I never actually saw anything. I would run outside right away, shine my flashlight, but I caught nothing. One evening, I set up my phone to record video. I aimed it at the ceiling inside the living room. I wanted to capture the sound, maybe get some proof to show the owner. I sat on the couch ready to press record when it started. Sure enough, I heard the footsteps. I hit record, but when I played it back later, the audio only picked up faint thuds. There was no clear sound of footsteps, just muffled bumps. It wasn't the proof I was hoping for, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't imagining it. I didn't know what else to do. I called the owner again and told him about the strange activity. He insisted I was mistaken, or maybe it was some local wildlife. But there aren't big animals around here, and the footsteps sounded too human to me. Plus, my friends heard it. The owner promised he would come by the next morning to check the place. He showed up, took a quick look around, checked the roof by standing on his truck bed, but he didn't see any damage or footprints. The roof had a thin layer of sand and dried salt from the sea breeze, and he didn't notice any traces of someone walking up there. He left with a shrug, telling me to call again if anything happened. I spent another week in that house. Every night, I heard the footsteps at least once. Each time I felt my throat go dry and my heart thud in my chest. Some nights I ran outside multiple times looking for a clue. Nothing ever changed. There were no prints in the sand. There was no ladder or rope. The walls had no scratches or chipped paint. Inside, I didn't see cracks or breaks in the ceiling. It was like someone or something was there without leaving a trace. Toward the end of my stay, I gave up on trying to solve it. I started sleeping on the couch, leaving the lights on and just hoping it wouldn't last too long each time. Sometimes I'd sit there feeling the sweat trickle down my neck, listening to each footstep. I'd close my eyes and try to breathe steadily. It rarely worked. I always felt like an intruder was right above me. I kept bracing for something worse, but it never escalated. I never got attacked. I never saw anyone. I only heard them, always out of sight, always just out of reach. On my last morning, I packed up early. I walked around the outside one more time just to see if anything changed. The sand looked smooth, the walls were fine, and the roof was still intact. I locked the door behind me and took one final glance. Everything looked completely normal under the morning sun. I couldn't believe the nights I had spent there, sweating and trembling at those sounds. I drove away, feeling both relieved and frustrated. I didn't have an explanation. I didn't know if it was a person messing with me, some weird phenomenon, or something else entirely. But I knew I wouldn't forget those nights. Even now, I can still feel my chest tighten when I think about that slow, heavy pacing on the roof. It never felt like an animal. It felt like a human with a purpose. Yet I never saw anyone. I never caught them. I only heard those footsteps, and they kept me awake every night of that vacation. That's all I can say. I work in a dim old office building in the middle of downtown. The place has been here for decades, with worn carpets, yellowing walls, and buzzing fluorescent lights. I'm 45 years old, and I spend my nights finishing reports long after everyone else goes home. My company installed motion sensors a few weeks ago to prevent break-ins. At first, I didn't think much of it, but now, the sensors go off around 11 o'clock every night, signaling movement in the corridor. There's never anyone there when I look. It's just me, the empty hallway, and the distant hum of the air conditioning. I've checked the cameras, and sometimes I see this strange shape, like a blur rather than a solid person. Other times, the system picks up activity in the file room, yet the door remains locked. People tell me it's just a glitch, but it feels wrong. I usually arrive at the office around 2 in the afternoon. I review financial documents, draft proposals, and answer emails. The day shift around me talks, jokes, and drinks coffee, so it doesn't feel creepy. Most people leave by 6 or 7 in the evening. The building's security guys do their rounds until about 9. After that, they lock the main doors, and I'm basically on my own. I like having the place to myself for a while, but things have changed since the motion sensors started going off. The first time the sensor alerted me, I was in my office scanning through an online news article. The notification flashed on my computer screen. Motion detected, hallway 3. My heart jumped. The entire building was supposed to be empty, except for me. I slid my chair back and stood up. My hands felt clammy. I walked to the door and opened it a crack. I could hear the same soft hum of the lights, maybe the AC rattling in the vents, but nothing else. I stepped outside. My footsteps echoed on the old tile floor. The hallway lights flickered once, which they sometimes do. I walked the length of the corridor. Doors to other offices were closed. No sign of anyone. I checked the men's restroom, flipped the light switch. Empty. I ran my hand through my hair and told myself it was just a bug in the software. A few nights later, it happened again. Same time, about 11 p.m. I was packing up my things ready to leave, and I got that notification on my computer. This time it said, "Motion detected, file room." That room is next to the break area, down a short hallway on the opposite side of our floor. I locked my office door behind me and walked slowly in that direction. I felt my chest tighten a bit. I could hear a buzz from the old vending machine by the break area. My shoes squeaked on the tile as I approached the file room door. It's a solid wooden door with a secure electronic lock. I tried the handle, still locked. I didn't hear anything inside. The small window in the door only showed darkness. I pulled out my work badge and swiped it. The door clicked. I pushed it open. The rows of metal cabinets looked the same as always. I flicked on the overhead light. The cabinet stood silent, full of folders, binders, and old boxes. I didn't see anything out of place. I stepped inside, checked the corners, glanced behind the cabinets near the wall. Nothing there. When I got back to my office, I decided to look at the security footage. The cameras in the hallway showed a quick flicker of something passing by, but I couldn't identify what it was. It didn't look like a person, more like a distortion or a glitch in the feed. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired. Then I saw the sensor logs. They recorded movement at exactly 11:03 p.m., which matched the camera's timestamp. Over the next few weeks, the same thing happened. Almost every night around 11, I'd get 1 or 2 notifications. Sometimes it said the corridor, sometimes the file room, sometimes even the small conference room near the elevators. Each time I found nothing. The security staff insisted everything was fine. They suggested it might be a software update issue. But I started hearing strange sounds late at night. I heard faint scraping noises like a chair being dragged across the floor, even though I knew all those conference rooms were empty. One time I heard a series of soft clicks, almost like someone typing on a keyboard in a nearby office. When I went to check, the room was dark. The desk chairs were pushed in. The computers were off. I tried to ignore the feeling that someone or something was lurking around. I told myself that I was imagining the sounds. I was just tired, lonely, maybe a little paranoid. But the tension grew. My pulse would race when the corridor lights flickered, or when I heard the slight whir of the elevator doors opening down the hall. I'd go to check and find the elevator empty on our floor, doors quietly sliding closed again. The building's old infrastructure sometimes caused these minor glitches, or at least, that's what everyone said. One night, I decided to set up my phone to record a video while I was down the hall. I placed it on my office windowsill, aimed it toward the corridor. Then I walked to the break area for some water, trying to act normal. My stomach felt tight as I waited for the sensor to trigger, hoping to catch something on my phone's camera. Sure enough, at 10:59 p.m., my computer chimed with a sensor alert. Motion detected, hallway 3. I took a deep breath and walked out of the break area. My palms were sweating. When I got back to my office, I grabbed my phone. The battery was still fine, and it had been recording the entire time. I played the video. The corridor looked empty. Then, at around 10:59 p.m., the screen flickered. For a fraction of a second, I saw a distortion near the corner of the hall. It looked almost like a tall figure, but there wasn't any clear outline. It jerked forward, then vanished. My heart felt like it was pounding in my throat. I paused the video and zoomed in. It was still just a blur. I showed the clip to my coworker the next morning, one of the IT guys who comes in early. He shrugged and said it could be a camera focus issue. I nodded, pretending to agree. But I didn't feel reassured. The next week, the strange activity persisted. I started dreading the moment when security would leave for the night. I didn't want to admit I was scared, but I couldn't push aside the anxiety building in me. My mouth felt dry after 9 p.m. each evening, and my neck muscles stayed tense, making it hard to concentrate on my reports. Around 10:30 p.m., I'd rush to finish my work, but something always came up that forced me to stay longer. A last-minute email from a client or a spreadsheet error I needed to fix. One night, I was almost done with a budget analysis. It was about 10:45. I was focused on the numbers, trying to keep my mind off the sensor alerts. Suddenly, I heard a thud in the hallway. I froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it was distinct. I got up and opened the door. The corridor was lit by those sickly fluorescent tubes, casting that pale light on the floor. Nothing looked off. Then I heard another soft sound behind me, maybe from the opposite end of the hall. I walked slowly in that direction, past empty cubicles. My heart was racing. My breaths felt shallow. I looked into each cubicle. No one. Then I heard the sensor beep from the break area. My mind started racing. I turned around and headed there, stepping carefully, listening. I reached the break area. The vending machine buzzed. The fridge hummed. The sensor on the wall blinked green, indicating recent motion detection. But it was just me standing there. I turned to leave, and for a moment I thought I saw movement outside the window at the end of the hallway. The reflection from the city lights made it hard to see clearly. I walked closer to the glass. Outside, the downtown streets were mostly empty, with a few cars passing by. The window's reflection showed my own silhouette. Then I saw something shift behind me in the reflection. I spun around, but the hallway was empty again. My entire body was tense. My chest felt tight. I rubbed my eyes and leaned against the wall. I must have stayed there for a minute or two, just trying to catch my breath. A few nights after that, I decided to confront my manager about it. I told him I needed more people working late so I wouldn't be alone. He said the budget didn't allow for that. I asked if maybe I could work from home after a certain hour. but he insisted the company needed me on site to handle sensitive data. He asked me if I was feeling well. I told him I was just a bit stressed. He recommended I take a break during the evening, maybe step out for a quick walk. He brushed off the sensor issue, saying the system was brand new and still had bugs. I nodded and tried not to let my frustration show. Every evening around 9:30 or 10, the security guard on duty would give a quick wave and step into the elevator to leave. I tried to make small talk a few times, hoping to convince him to stay longer, but he had a strict schedule. After he left, I'd be alone again. Around 10:50 or so, I'd start feeling the knot in my stomach. My eyes would flicker between my computer screen and the sensor monitor. The second the notification popped up, my heart would skip a beat. Last Thursday was particularly bad. I was working on a tight deadline. It was 11:10 p.m. when I got the alert. Motion detected, corridor 2. This corridor is the one leading to the restrooms and a small storage closet. I was exhausted and irritated. I grabbed my flashlight, figuring I'd check quickly, then get back to work. I walked down the corridor. The lights overhead were working fine. Everything looked normal. Then I heard a scraping noise from the storage closet. My stomach clenched. The door to that closet is always locked, and only maintenance has the key. The handle was in place, the lock wasn't broken. I stood there, flashlight in hand, deciding whether to knock or walk away. I heard a faint shuffling sound from inside. I raised my hand and knocked. "Hello?" No answer. I waited a few seconds. My breathing was loud in my own ears. I convinced myself it could be a rodent or maybe something shifting on the shelves inside. I told myself I was being silly. I walked away, stepping backward at first, not wanting to turn my back on the door. Then I forced myself to turn around and head back to my office. My skin felt clammy, and I noticed a dull ache in my temples from the tension. On Friday, the last day of the work week, I felt on edge the entire afternoon. I spent my break staring at the corridor outside my door, expecting something to dart by at any moment. I finished most of my tasks by 8 p.m. I told myself I'd leave by 9, no matter what. But at 8:45, I got an email from a client needing a revised contract ASAP. I sat back down and worked on it. By the time I finished, it was 10:30. I took a deep breath, gathered my papers, and packed my bag. As I shut down my computer, the motion sensor alert popped up again. Motion detected, hallway 3. My heart rate spiked, but I forced myself to ignore it. I opened my door and glanced around. The hallway was empty. I whispered to myself, "Screw this," and locked my office behind me. While I waited at the elevator, I heard a muffled bump from somewhere behind me. I ignored it. My muscles were tight, and I just wanted to get out. The elevator felt excruciatingly slow. When the doors finally opened, I hurried inside and pressed the ground floor button. The doors closed. I felt my shoulders relax a bit as I descended. I stepped onto the lobby floor and saw that all the main lights were off except for a few in the entrance area. The exit was right there, so I walked toward it. Suddenly, the motion sensor for the main lobby beeped. I turned around. For a split second, I thought I saw something move in the corner of the lobby. It was like a shadow shifting along the wall. My heart hammered in my chest. I stared at the spot. Nothing else happened. I took a shaky breath and pushed the door open. Outside, the cool air hit me. I exhaled hard, feeling a slight relief just to be in the open. I haven't solved this. Every night, the sensors still ping movement at around 11. The security footage still shows that blur. I keep hearing distant chair scrapes, the soft clicks of a keyboard, and sometimes footsteps. I'm not quitting my job. I need it. But I'm more anxious every day. My shoulders ache from tension, and I'm always tired in the morning. People have told me it's all in my head or just an electrical fault causing false alarms. I don't know what it is, but it's getting harder to ignore. Tonight, I'm still here. It's 10:56 p.m. I can see the sensor's dashboard on my screen. I'm waiting for it to go off again. My hands feel a little shaky on the keyboard. The building is quiet. The lights overhead buzz in that steady monotone. My eyes keep flicking to the door, expecting any second for that alert to pop up. I keep telling myself there's nobody here, that it's all just a glitch. But my gut says otherwise. And right now, I can't shake the feeling that something is standing just outside my office door, listening to me breathe, waiting for me to step out. I never expected to find anything strange on my family's small farm. I came here for peace and quiet. I was tired of the noise in the city. I wanted an escape. On my first few nights, I slept deeply, lulled by the wind in the trees and the distant clucking of our hens. Then things changed, and I started hearing those grunting sounds near the chicken coop. They were low and harsh, almost like a wild boar. But we don't have wild boars here. At least, not that I've ever seen. My name's Daniel. I'm 38. I work in an office during the week, and I wanted a break. This farm has been in my family for decades. My uncle still lives on his own property a little way down the road. He's in his 60s and knows this region inside out. But even he never mentioned hearing anything like the sounds I heard that second week. One night, around 11, I was about to doze off when I caught these deep, rumbling noises outside my window. At first, I thought it was some odd echo of the wind. Then I got up, pulled back the curtain, and saw nothing. Just the moonlight over the yard. I thought maybe I was stressed out and imagining things. But the next day, I decided to check around the chicken coop anyway. The fence was in good shape. No broken posts, no holes in the wire. But there were footprints in the dirt. They weren't huge, but they were bigger than a dog's prints. They had this strange shape, almost like a large paw but with a longer middle toe. I crouched down and pressed my hand next to one of them. The print was wider and longer than my hand span. I felt a chill, but I pushed it aside. This farm is pretty far from any forest. I couldn't figure out what would leave a mark like that, but I didn't see any real damage, so I went on with my day. On the third night, I woke up to the sound of the roosters squawking like they were in a panic. It was around 2 in the morning. My heart was racing from the sudden noise. I grabbed my flashlight from the bedside table and ran outside in my boxers and a t-shirt. I aimed the beam at the coop, expecting maybe to see a fox or a stray dog. But what I saw was a big, dark shape. It moved fast, almost jumping away from my light. I caught a glimpse of a hunched back and thick legs. It didn't look like a normal dog or a coyote. It was too broad in the shoulders. The second it noticed me, it spun around and bolted toward the overgrown bushes behind the shed. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. My mouth was dry. My legs felt weak. The roosters were still clucking and rattling around in their pen. I waited a minute, then backed up toward the porch, keeping my flashlight pointed at the bushes. I didn't see anything else. Eventually, I went back inside and locked the door. I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, thinking about that shape and the way it ran. The next morning, I checked the area in daylight. I found fresh footprints in the mud around the fence. Same shape as before. I also found a few feathers scattered around. Not a full clump or anything, but enough to suggest something tried to grab a chicken. The weird thing was that I didn't find a broken fence or any sign that the creature dug under it. The gate was still latched, and no chickens were missing. They were all there, a little spooked but alive. I decided to call my uncle. He got here around lunchtime. I showed him the tracks and the feathers. He grunted and rubbed his chin. He said it might be some large dog that got away from a nearby farm. But we don't have many neighbors, and none have a dog that big. Plus, the shape of the print seemed off. My uncle didn't have much else to say. He told me to keep an eye out and offered to lend me his old rifle if I wanted. I said I'd think about it. That night, I was more cautious. I locked all the doors and windows before dark. I made sure the coop was sealed up. I even pulled out a piece of plywood and blocked any gap I could find around the shed. Then I sat in the living room with the TV on low volume, waiting to see if the thing would come back. Around 1 in the morning, I heard the chickens making soft clucking noises. Not a full panic, but more like they were on alert. My skin crawled. I grabbed my flashlight again and stepped onto the porch. I didn't go out into the yard right away, I just stood there trying to listen. There was a faint scraping sound like claws on dirt. I stepped off the porch, shining my light along the ground. Then I saw a shadow pass behind the coop. It was tall, maybe up to my chest, and hunched over. I froze. The light wasn't strong enough to give me a clear look, but it was enough to see movement. That shape darted behind the trees on the edge of my property. It moved with surprising speed for something that looked so bulky. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. My hands shook. Part of me wanted to chase it, but I knew I was alone, in the middle of the night with no weapon. So I backed up to the porch, breathing hard. My mind raced. I didn't know what to do. I waited a few more minutes, shining my flashlight from side to side. Nothing came back. Finally, I went inside and locked the door again. The next morning, I found more tracks in the soft earth behind the coop. I also noticed more feathers scattered around. But once again, no missing chickens. They seemed frightened, though. They stayed near the back of their enclosure, barely coming out to feed. I started feeling uneasy. I wasn't even sure if I should stay, but this was my family's farm. I wasn't going to let some unknown creature chase me away. By the fifth night of this nonsense, I was sleeping in short bursts. I kept waking up whenever I heard a branch snap or an animal rustle. My nerves were on edge. I moved my bed so it was closer to the window, hoping to catch a better look outside if I heard anything suspicious. That night, around 2:30 in the morning, the grunting came again. This time it sounded closer to the house. I sat up, heart racing. I turned off the lamp and looked through the window. My porch light was still on, casting a weak glow over part of the yard. I saw a shape moving near the side of the house, close to the bushes that lead to the back fence. I couldn't see details, just the dark outline of something big. The fence around the yard is maybe 4 feet high in that section, but this thing took one quick jump and cleared it, disappearing into the trees. I sat there sweating, my breath shallow. I thought, that's not a normal dog. That's something else. In the morning, I walked out there. I found fresh footprints in the dirt outside the fence. Then, following the trail of prints, I saw that they continued for a few yards and then just stopped. The ground wasn't rocky or hard. It was the same soft soil as before. But the tracks ended as though the creature had lifted straight off the ground. I felt a tightness in my chest. I didn't have a good explanation. I stared at that spot, trying to imagine how it happened. No scuff marks, no broken twigs. The prints just ended. I got on the phone with my uncle again. He said he might come by after dark and see if we could figure this out together. I waited all day, feeling restless. I paced around the house, checked the fences again, made sure the chickens were okay. They seemed fine in daylight. My uncle showed up around 8. He had his old rifle with him. He didn't seem eager to use it, but we both felt better having it around. We sat on the porch with the lights off, drinking coffee and talking in low voices. We wanted to see if we could spot anything. Around 1 a.m., we heard the first grunts. It wasn't as loud as before, but it was close. We both stood up. My uncle raised the rifle. I flicked on a strong flashlight, aiming it toward the sound. We saw branches swaying at the edge of the yard, but no clear figure. Then we heard a scraping noise near the coop. We hurried over, keeping the light ahead of us. By the time we reached the fence, the thing was gone. We only saw fresh scratches on the wooden fence post. They were deep, like claw marks. My uncle's hands were trembling a bit. He mumbled that he had never seen anything like it. We stayed up until dawn, but we never got a good look at the creature. The next day, my uncle had to go home. I felt uneasy, but I also felt determined. I decided to set up a few old trail cameras that my cousin had left here years ago. I placed them around the coop in a few spots near the trees. I wasn't sure if they still worked, but it was worth a shot. At least then I'd have some proof of what was prowling around at night. That night I tried to stay calm. I made myself a quick dinner, turned off most of the lights, and waited. I planned to check the cameras in the morning. Around 2 a.m., The roosters started clucking again. My stomach tightened. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed outside. I saw movement by the coop, a large shape again. It grunted when my light hit it, then ran off toward the trees. I couldn't catch it. I saw the bushes sway as it pushed through them. I stood there panting, flashlight shaking in my hand. It felt like it was toying with me, coming back every night, never letting me see it clearly. In the morning, I checked the cameras. One of them was knocked over, lens pointing at the ground. Another didn't record anything except static. The last one caught some footage, but it was mostly darkness. There was a brief second of movement, a blurred outline near the corner of the screen. It looked like a large, upright creature, maybe on 2 legs, maybe on 4. The shape was too distorted to be sure. My heart pounded when I watched it. I realized I had no idea how to handle something like this. Maybe it was an animal with a strange gait. Maybe it was something else. I couldn't see details, but it definitely wasn't just a normal dog. I decided to reinforce the coop with some extra boards and a better lock on the door, even though the creature hadn't actually broken in or killed anything yet. I still found feathers every morning scattered around. It was clear it was stressing the chickens out. I couldn't imagine what would keep returning to the same spot if it didn't actually get a meal. The next few nights the pattern repeated. Strange grunts, footprints appearing around the yard, feathers in random spots. The trail of prints always vanished at some point. I even tried spreading flour around one area of the yard to see if I could track where it went. But the footprints ended in the same abrupt way. I lost sleep every night, jumping at any sound, shining my flashlight out the window whenever I heard branches move. On the 10th day, my uncle offered to stay a couple of nights, but he had his own chores to do and couldn't hang around forever. I was alone again. The tension was too high for me. My shoulders were stiff and I couldn't focus on anything else. I considered calling animal control, but we're too far out, and I wasn't sure they'd take me seriously without more evidence. I didn't want to sound like some paranoid city guy who can't handle normal wildlife, but deep down, I knew this wasn't normal wildlife. I tried sleeping in the living room with the windows open enough to hear if anything came close. I kept a flashlight on the coffee table along with a sturdy shovel. I don't own any firearms and I'm not eager to start shooting at shadows. I just wanted to protect myself if it ever entered the house. Thankfully, that never happened. But the nights were still a mess of strange noises, fleeting shapes, and pure stress. Each morning, I found the same patterns, footprints and loose feathers, with no clue where the creature came from or where it went. After almost 2 weeks of this routine, I had enough. My nerves were frayed. My hands shook sometimes when I held my coffee mug. My stomach churned at the thought of going outside after dark. I decided to cut my stay short. I packed up my clothes and locked down the farm as best I could. I called my uncle and told him I was heading back to the city for a while. I didn't see the creature on my last night, but I still heard it grunting somewhere in the distance. I felt relief when I got in my car and turned onto the main road. I left a note for my uncle asking him to call me if anything strange kept happening. I still don't know what that creature was. Maybe it was just a big, sick animal. Maybe it was something else entirely. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out. Even now, back in the city, I still wake up at night sometimes, imagining I hear those low grunts. When I close my eyes, I see that shape crouching by the chicken coop. I don't have answers, and I'm not sure I want them. That thing is out there, somewhere near my family's farm, and I have no idea if it will return. For now, I'm trying to get my mind back to normal. I hope I can. But I can't stop remembering those footprints that vanished into thin air. I knew something was wrong the moment I felt a cold chill on my skin, even though the windows were shut and the fan was off. That was the same day I brought my grandfather's old mahogany dresser into my bedroom. I had inherited it after his passing, along with a few other items. I didn't think much of it at first. It was heavy, well made, and had a nice finish. I placed it against the wall beside my closet and tried to ignore the feeling that something was off. My grandfather was always a private man, He loved the family in his own way, but he had secrets. People in the family whispered about his closed-off study and the locked boxes he kept. I never asked about those things when he was alive. I assumed he had personal papers or maybe photographs he didn't want to share. I never pried. I respected him, and I figured everyone deserves some privacy. I'm 29 now, recently married, and my wife and I are just starting our life together in a small apartment. We have decent space, but it's not huge. The dresser fit well in our bedroom, and I liked that it gave us more storage. My wife works a lot during the day, so she barely goes into the bedroom except to grab clothes or put away laundry. I work from home most of the time. This means I spend more time around the dresser than she does. The strangeness started about a week after I got it. I had decided to clean the dresser thoroughly because it had that old wood smell and a few scratches. I pulled the drawers out and wiped them with polish. As I did this, I noticed something stuck at the bottom of one drawer. It looked like old letters without envelopes. I could see different handwriting. I set them aside on the bed, thinking maybe they belonged to some relative. Then I sat down and read them. Each one had the same signature at the bottom, though the name was smudged and hard to read. The handwriting was feminine, but I couldn't make out the exact name. It looked like it started with an L or maybe an E. These letters were strange. They mentioned punishment, repentance, and a warning not to run from sin. I skimmed them quickly, and I felt a prickly sensation on the back of my neck. The language was intense and urgent. The person writing them seemed desperate or frightened. I wasn't sure who she was talking to, but there were references to you and your promises. I didn't see my grandfather's name, but something told me he was involved. I felt unsettled, so I put the letters back in the drawer. I tried to shrug off the weird feeling by telling myself these might just be old notes from someone else in the family. Maybe they had nothing to do with my grandfather. But the language in them echoed in my mind. I kept hearing those words, punição, arrependimento, don't run from sin. I felt like the letters themselves radiated a strange energy. I decided not to mention them to my wife that night. I didn't want to alarm her. The next day, while my wife was at work, I was in the living room. My laptop was on the coffee table. I went to grab a cup of coffee from the kitchen, and when I came back, the mug of pencils on my desk in the corner was lying on the floor near the bedroom door. Pencils were all over the place. I froze. I hadn't been anywhere near that desk, and I didn't see it happen. I thought maybe the air conditioner had knocked it over, but the AC wasn't on. The desk was a few feet away from the door. It didn't make sense. I went into the bedroom to see if something else was disturbed. Nothing else looked out of place. The dresser was closed. I felt uneasy, but I tried to push it aside. I told myself I might have bumped the desk when I walked out. I tried not to dwell on it. That same night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard a soft rustling sound. It was pitch black in our room. My wife was sleeping beside me. I heard what sounded like someone carefully going through papers. I reached over to the nightstand, turned on the small lamp, and sat up. The noise stopped right away. I looked at the dresser. All the drawers were shut. I felt sweat forming on my forehead and my heart was pounding. I stayed awake for a while, listening. I couldn't relax, but eventually, I fell back asleep from sheer exhaustion. Over the next few days, little things happened that made me more anxious. I'd leave the bedroom and return an hour later to find the closet door open or a shoe lying in the middle of the room. My wife said she didn't touch anything. She works long hours and sometimes she doesn't get home until late. She told me I was probably stressed from work or maybe I was sleepwalking. I asked if she ever heard rustling or knocking at night, and she just looked at me like I was talking nonsense. She said she was tired and didn't notice anything. I decided to open the letters again to see if I missed something important. I locked myself in the bedroom, sat on the floor, and took them out. I read them one by one. They were all directed to someone who had apparently made some promise he didn't keep. The writer was scolding this person for not facing his guilt. There were references to a specific place and time, but no exact dates. There was a mention of a house with a big front window and a hidden chest. The words were intense. I could almost feel the writer's anger and sadness. At one point, I saw the phrase, "I will not allow you to escape the truth." That made the hairs on my arms stand up. My heart was racing. I felt trapped in my own room. I stood up to get some air. When I did, I heard a loud creak from the dresser. The bottom drawer slid open by maybe 2 inches. There was no draft. The bedroom door was closed. I moved closer, feeling a knot in my stomach. I reached out and pushed the drawer shut. My hand was shaking. I kept thinking about burning those letters, but part of me wanted answers. I wondered what kind of secrets my grandfather had hidden. That night I could barely sleep. I kept hearing the same faint rustling noise, like pages being turned slowly. Once, I even heard a soft thump, as if something dropped inside the drawer. My wife slept through it all. She's a heavy sleeper, and she's exhausted after work. I stayed under the covers, sweating, listening, feeling my heart pound. I remember thinking, I need to do something. I can't ignore this. The following morning, I decided I would search the entire dresser. I pulled out every drawer, turned them upside down, checked the corners. I examined the inner frame of the dresser too. Eventually, I noticed a small compartment in the back that didn't match the rest of the wood. It looked like it was replaced or patched. I tapped on it, and it made a hollow sound. I grabbed a screwdriver and managed to pry it loose. Inside, I found 2 small objects. One was a worn-out piece of cloth wrapped around something. The other was a folded piece of paper. I unwrapped the cloth and found an old key with a faded label attached by string. The label had a few smudged letters. I couldn't read them. The piece of paper was another note. It was signed by the same unknown woman. It said something about the final night and the last opportunity to confess. I stood there, holding that note, feeling a cold sensation in my chest. I didn't know what it meant or why it was hidden. I started feeling dizzy, so I put everything back inside the compartment except the key, which I kept in my hand. I wanted to see if my wife recognized it. That night, she came home, and I showed her the key. She didn't have any idea what it could open. She said it might be for some old storage box or maybe a safe. I told her about the hidden compartment. She shrugged and asked if I planned to do anything about it. I said I didn't know. She told me if it was scaring me, maybe I should throw the letters away or burn them, but she wasn't sure. She said it was my call. Then she went to take a shower and left me alone with my thoughts. I couldn't sleep that night. At around 3 a.m., I heard a loud bang in the bedroom. It sounded like a drawer slamming shut. My wife shot up in bed and asked what happened. I turned on the lamp and saw that the bottom drawer was half open. She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "What the hell?" I got up, went to push it shut, and heard a soft whisper. It didn't sound like English or Portuguese. It was more like a breathy moan. I felt my knees tremble, and my wife yanked the covers up around her. She told me to get back in bed, that we should ignore it. I couldn't ignore it. I stayed up the rest of the night staring at the dresser. I didn't hear more whispers, but I felt something in the air. The next morning I made a decision. I took all the letters and put them in a shoebox. I also took the key, wrapped it in the cloth, and placed it in the same box. I carried the box to the living room and set it next to the couch. My plan was to get rid of it all. I had a lighter. I was going to do it. But I stood there staring at the box and I couldn't move. Part of me wants to investigate. I think if I dig deeper, maybe I'll find out who this woman was, what promise was broken, and why she wrote all those angry words. I wonder if my grandfather did something that left this woman furious or desperate. But I also feel like the more I look, the stronger the disturbances get. The voices and the moving objects are getting worse. I don't want to live in constant fear. My wife says she's worried about me. She hasn't seen much herself, but she believes something's off. Today, while my wife was at work, I sat in the bedroom with the dresser for a few minutes. I stared at it, waiting to see if anything would happen. Nothing did, but I felt my heart pounding the whole time. My palms were sweaty. I could barely keep my breathing steady. I decided to pull out the letters again and read them slowly. maybe to piece together more clues. But as soon as I touched them, I heard a scraping sound come from the top drawer. It was like nails on wood. My stomach lurched. I dropped the letters. I left the room and closed the door. I'm sitting in the living room now, writing all this down so I can keep track of what's happening. I feel more alert than usual. My eyes keep darting to the bedroom door. Every small noise in the apartment makes me jump. I keep thinking about that key. I have no idea what it opens, but I suspect it's tied to my grandfather's secrets. Maybe he made a promise to this woman and never kept it. Maybe he was hiding something that haunted him. I can almost sense his presence in that dresser. I wonder if he ever heard these same noises. I wonder if he was too afraid to face them. I'm at the point where I need to make a choice. If I burn these letters, maybe it'll stop. But part of me thinks that the cause of this is deeper. Maybe that woman's story is lingering in the wood of that dresser, and ignoring it won't help. I told my wife I might try to find out who wrote the letters by checking with older relatives or researching the names on my grandfather's side. She rolled her eyes but said, if it'll give me peace of mind, I should do it. She just wants our apartment back to normal. I feel torn. If I keep digging, will these sounds and moving objects get worse? I'm already losing sleep. My shoulders are tense, and my neck feels stiff all the time. My wife worries about my mental health, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm in the middle of something that isn't finished. I open the bedroom door a crack to peek inside. The dresser is silent, and everything seems normal, but I know it's not. When I think about that bottom drawer sliding open and hearing that whisper, my stomach flips. My hands tremble just remembering it. Right now, the letters are in the shoebox on the coffee table. I keep glancing at them, thinking about taking a match and lighting the whole thing. But the key is still there, and I don't want to lose it in case it helps solve this. I'm stuck. I'm afraid. My wife tries to comfort me, but she doesn't understand what it feels like to sense a presence in the bedroom. She doesn't hear the papers rustling or feel the cold spots in the air. She doesn't have to see that drawer inching open on its own. I know I have to make a decision soon. Either I destroy the evidence and hope the haunting ends, or I keep going until I figure out the truth behind those letters. I'm not sure which path is better. Right now, I'm just trying to hold it together. Every night, I brace myself for another noise or another drawer opening. Every morning, I check to see if anything has moved. I can't keep living like this. But I also can't walk away from whatever is happening. I haven't told anyone else about it. My friends would probably say I'm imagining things, but I know it's real. My wife is starting to see it too. Something is in that dresser, or connected to it, and I feel it's tied to my grandfather's past. I don't know what he did, or why this woman wrote those letters, but I can't ignore it anymore. One way or another, I'm going to face it. And whatever happens, I hope I can finally put this dresser and its secrets to rest. I never expected a few candles to make me question my own peace of mind, but that's exactly where I've ended up. They were just decorative pieces in a furnished rental, and I thought they looked nice enough. I never imagined they would start lighting themselves or that I would be checking over my shoulder every time I heard a faint creak in the hallway. I moved into this house about 2 months ago. My own place is under renovation, and I didn't want to stay in a cramped hotel room. This property was advertised as charming and fully furnished. I took a quick tour, liked the spacious living area, and noticed some fancy candelabras in the dining room. The owner told me I was free to rearrange the furniture or remove items I didn't like, but I figured I'd just leave everything as it was because I planned to stay here only a few months. I arrived with a couple of suitcases and some electronics. I didn't bring much else. The first few days were normal. I worked long hours, came home late, reheated leftovers, and went to bed. The house was always quiet. The dining room stayed dark because I mostly used the kitchen. I noticed the candelabras only when I was walking from the living room to the hall. They were elegant, with thick wax candles that looked pretty old. They were covered in dust, which made it obvious they hadn't been lit in a while. I never touched them. After about a week, I came home one night and smelled something odd. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor was burning something or that there was some electrical problem. It was that strong, warm scent of melted wax. It stopped me in the entrance hall because it was so distinct. I walked into the dining room and saw 2 candles burning in the biggest candelabra. They were dripping wax down the sides. The tablecloth had some droplets on it, but nothing was on fire. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to lock the place and someone had come inside. But everything else was in order. My laptop was still on the coffee table. The windows were locked and the front door looked normal. I felt a wave of confusion. I checked the locks again just to be sure, and they were fine. It made no sense. I never light candles. I wasn't even sure where the matches were. I went around the house, checking every door and window. There was no sign of forced entry. I felt a twinge of unease, but I blew out the candles, cleaned up the melted wax the best I could, and tried to relax. I told myself maybe I'd left them lit by accident, although I knew that was impossible. I'd never even touched them before. Still, I shrugged it off and decided it was probably my imagination or maybe the landlord had been in the house for some reason, which still sounded odd, but it felt like the only explanation. The next evening I got home a bit earlier and didn't smell anything. No candles were lit. I started to believe I'd overreacted. But the night after that, I came in and smelled the same warm, waxy odor again. I walked directly to the dining room and saw a single candle flickering in the candelabra. There were fresh drips of wax on the table again. That was when I felt a chill in my stomach. Someone or something was lighting these candles. I checked every room in the house, opening closets, looking behind furniture, peering under beds. Nothing looked disturbed. No one was hiding anywhere. I felt stupid and a bit terrified. My heart was pounding. It made me question every noise, every shadow. I tried calling the landlord, but it went to voicemail. I left a message, telling him about the candles and how weird it was. I didn't mention that I was starting to feel spooked, but I asked if he had a key and if he'd come over for any reason. He never got back to me that night. Over the next week, I found the candles lit on 3 different occasions. Sometimes it was 2 candles, sometimes it was just 1. A few times the wax would still be dripping, as if they had been lit only recently. Other times the candles had already burned down an inch or so. I made a habit of checking the entire house every time I came home. I started to notice small sounds at night too. I'd be watching TV or brushing my teeth, and I'd hear a short creak in the hallway, or a tap like a footstep on the wood floor. I would pause and listen. Then nothing. The house would be silent again. My mind began to race with explanations. I tried to think logically. Old houses make noise, right? But the steps had a pattern, like actual footsteps, spaced out as if someone was creeping along. One night I decided to stay up later than usual and see if I could catch anything happening. I turned off most of the lights and waited in the living room. I was on my phone, scrolling aimlessly. A couple of times I got up to check the dining room, but the candles were unlit. Eventually, around 2 a.m., I started drifting off to sleep. I woke up to a soft snap, like a lighter flick. My eyes shot open and I jumped off the couch. I hurried into the dining room. The first thing I saw was a faint glow at the center of the table. One of the candles was lit. The flame was small and steady. I stood there, breathing heavily. I felt a cold tingling on my arms. I walked toward the table slowly. My plan was to grab the candle, see if it was warm, and maybe figure out how long it had been lit. As I got close, the flame seemed to rise an inch, like it was reacting to me. I stopped. My pulse was pounding in my ears. There was no draft, no breeze. The windows were closed. I felt my chest tighten, and I noticed my hands were trembling. The flame flickered sharply, then settled down again. I eventually stepped closer and blew it out. My heart was racing and my palms were sweaty. I felt the candle. It was warm, but I had no idea how it had ignited in the first place. After that, I started feeling jumpy all the time. I'd wake up at night and think I saw a shadow in the hallway. I'd hear a small knock or a crack in the ceiling, and I'd hold my breath. I'd walk into the living room and see the reflection of a candle flame in the TV screen, but then I'd turn around and see nothing was lit. My sleep got worse. I started leaving the bedroom light on, which felt childish, but it gave me a little comfort. I kept telling myself I needed to find a rational explanation. Maybe there was some electrical trick or a gas leak that created illusions, but the smell of wax was always real, and I could actually see the melted wax each time. I tried taking the candles out of the candelabras one night. I put them in a drawer in the kitchen. I thought that might put an end to it. The next day I got home from work and went to check the drawer. The candles were still there. They hadn't moved. I felt relieved for a moment, but later that night I heard a low scraping sound in the dining room. I walked in and saw one of the candelabras was slightly shifted on the table, like it had been moved. The top had fresh wax residue on it, even though the candles weren't even inside it. That caused a new level of alarm for me. Something was messing with the house's items, but not necessarily sticking to the same routine. I decided to try a different approach. I removed the candles entirely and put them in the trunk of my car. I couldn't throw them out because they belonged to the landlord, but I wanted them out of the house. That night I slept a bit better, though I still felt on edge. No candles were lit because there were no candles to light. For 2 nights, the house felt quiet. I still heard occasional creaks, but nothing dramatic. On the 3rd night, around midnight, I was reading in bed when I heard the distinct sound of dripping. It was like liquid tapping on a hard surface. My stomach sank. I got out of bed, walked down the hall, and turned on the dining room light. There was a thin trail of melted wax on the table, leading from the center of the candelabra to the edge. But there were no candles in the house anymore. I had physically removed them. The candelabra was empty, yet there was melted wax right there, fresh and shiny, still dripping onto the tablecloth. I stood there staring, my mind swirling with confusion. The house was cold, but I felt a burst of heat behind my ears. It was pure disbelief. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. It was the landlord, returning my call from earlier. I answered and explained everything again, step by step. He seemed uncomfortable, but told me he had no reason to visit the house at night, and definitely wouldn't be lighting candles. He apologized for the weirdness and said he could come by to change the locks if I wanted. I agreed. Anything to restore some normalcy. We set a time for him to visit the next day. The landlord showed up around noon. I took a half day off from work. He replaced the front door lock and checked the windows. I showed him where I'd put the candles in my car, and he said I could keep them there if it helped me feel better. He didn't seem convinced that anything supernatural was happening, but he admitted the wax trails in the dining room were bizarre. He told me to call him if anything else happened. That evening I felt a little calmer, knowing the locks were new. I made dinner, watched a bit of TV, and went to bed around 11. At about 3:00 a.m., I woke to a soft crackling noise. It reminded me of the sound of a small fire. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I walked out of the bedroom, flipping on every light switch along the way. As I approached the dining room, I smelled hot wax and saw a faint glow dancing across the wall. My hair stood up on my arms. I stepped into the room and saw 2 candles in the candelabra, both burning. These weren't the old candles I had locked in my trunk. These were brand new. They were white, tall, and their wicks were blazing as if they had been burning for a while. Thick drops of wax were rolling down the sides. I froze in place. My mind was screaming at me to run out of the house, but I couldn't move for a few seconds. I felt a ringing in my ears. I forced myself to move forward, and as I got closer to the table, one of the flames flared upward again like it was reacting to my presence. I actually yelped. I looked around for any sign of a person, but I saw nothing. I reached out with my shaky hand and blew the candles out one by one. For a moment I expected something to grab my wrist. Nothing did, but my breath was ragged. I stepped back, rubbed my eyes, and stared at these fresh candles. They looked untouched except for the burn at the top. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a plastic bag, and carefully picked up the candles. I half expected them to flare up again. They stayed unlit as I stuffed them into the bag. I took them outside, dumped them into the trash bin, and slammed the lid shut. My heart was hammering. I stood on the porch looking at the quiet street, wondering if any neighbor had seen something weird. The windows around me were dark. No one else seemed awake. Since that night, I keep every light on whenever I'm home. I check each room every couple of hours. I still hear those soft footstep sounds in the hallway at least once a night. Sometimes, I'll walk into the dining room and see that a candelabra has shifted a few inches. I'll smell the faint trace of burned wax lingering in the air. At this point, I'm not sleeping well at all. My eyes feel heavy and dry. My head aches from lack of rest. But I can't shake the feeling that if I let my guard down, I'll find more candles lit or something else I can't explain. I haven't seen anyone actually light them. I haven't found matches or lighters around. But I have found scorch marks on the tablecloth in the morning. I've started thinking of moving out before the renovations on my place are done. I don't care if it means paying for a short-term hotel. The landlord offered no solutions beyond changing locks or removing the candles, and none of that helped for long. There's something unsettling about the way this house acts, almost like it has a daily routine of lighting candles. I don't want to guess why. I just want to sleep without expecting to see a flickering glow in the next room. I want to come home and not hold my breath when I cross the threshold, bracing for that warm smell of melted wax. Right now, though, I'm stuck here. I'm tired. I'm wary of every creak, every flicker, every shift of the shadows. All I know is that I'm counting down the days until I can leave. For now, I just get through each night one moment at a time, hoping I don't wake up to the glow of a fresh flame on that old dining room table. I wish I could ignore it, but I can't. It's there, and it's not going away. And tonight, as I sit here typing this, I hear soft clicks in the hall. My breath is shallow. I'm dreading the idea of going to check, but I know I will. I'll find new drips of wax or a faint glow. It's inevitable, and I hate it. But that's what my life is like now, all because of a few candles I never asked to light in the first place. I still remember the first time I heard the metallic banging. It was around 10:30 at night, and I was halfway through checking some boxes in our old back storage area. The noise was sharp, like someone hitting a heavy pipe against a metal rack. At first, I assumed it was just the old steel beams expanding with the drop in temperature, or maybe some leftover machinery cooling down. But that sound felt different. It had a pattern. It started, stopped, and then resumed in short bursts. I almost thought someone was testing me, trying to see if I would investigate. It made me uneasy, but I brushed it off because I was tired and wanted to finish my shift. I had no idea that was only the beginning. I work as a supervisor in a small factory. We produce simple consumer goods, nothing fancy, mostly plastic parts and basic metal assemblies. A few years ago, our boss purchased a large old warehouse to expand our storage capacity. The place was cheap and it needed quite a bit of renovation. They added some modern lighting and replaced a couple of the big doors with newer ones. But most of the structure remained the same. It's all thick walls, rusted supports, and an endless layout of shelves, boxes, and older equipment that we rarely use. During the day, it's pretty normal. Workers pass through with forklifts, or we get trucks loading and unloading on the far side. My job is to keep track of inventory, make sure we have enough materials for production, and coordinate shipments. I usually stay later than everyone else. My shifts often end around 9:00 or 9:30 at night. Sometimes, though, I'll stick around until 10:30 or 11:00 if we have a lot of orders. That's when things started getting weird. For the last couple of months, every time I walk through that old part of the warehouse after 10:00 or so, I hear noises. I'm not talking about quiet creaks or the hum of some leftover machine. I mean loud metallic clanks, sometimes accompanied by what sounds like a dull thud or scraping sound. It's always coming from the far end, near a set of tall shelves where we keep some outdated equipment. There's a big steel door back there that leads to an unused loading dock. It's locked from the inside, as far as I know. When I first heard the banging, I tried to ignore it. We have older machines in that corner, and I figured maybe something was settling. or the temperature changes were causing metal parts to expand or contract. But one night around 10:45, the noises changed. They stopped sounding random and started resembling footsteps. They were heavy, like boots on metal flooring, and they had a rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Then there was a pause, followed by a dragging sound, like someone pulling a large piece of equipment across the floor. My heart started pounding. I felt a cold sweat building on my forehead. I kept looking around, trying to spot anyone who might still be working, but I knew everybody had left an hour earlier. I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight from my office and walked down the main aisle toward the back. Most of the overhead lights were off, so the place was dim. There's a set of emergency lights near the ceiling, but they're spaced out, creating long shadows between the racks. I could hear my own footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. The air felt heavier there, like it was stale or trapped. I reached the far corner where the noise seemed to come from. Everything looked normal at first. Rows of metal shelves stacked with cardboard boxes, some spare parts, a few old pallets. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the floor. That's when I noticed fresh scratches on the metal shelves. They looked new because the surface was bright, not rusted like everything else. Each scratch ran a few inches. They were jagged, as if something sharp had dragged along the side. My stomach dropped. I scanned the area, but I didn't see anyone. I had the distinct feeling that someone was watching me from behind the boxes. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I heard a slight shuffle, like a footstep shifting weight, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response, just silence. I thought about searching between the shelves, but I got this strong sense that I was not alone. I felt like I needed to get out of there and back to my office. So I left, thinking I'd review the security footage later. When I checked the cameras the next day, I found almost nothing. The angle near the corner was partly blocked by tall stacks of boxes, so I couldn't see much besides the general area. No figures, no movement, just the shaky view of that dimly lit section. I asked my boss if we could install more cameras, but he said we didn't have the budget right now. He told me not to worry and hinted that I might be tired or overworked. I tried to drop it, but the noise kept happening. A week later, I was double-checking some last-minute shipments, and it was close to 10:30 again. I heard a door slam so loud it echoed throughout the warehouse. It sounded like a door with a heavy latch, the kind you'd find in a fire door. I sprinted toward the noise. Down the hallway, I saw the fire door near the back slowly swing shut again, as if someone had pushed it with force. These doors are designed to close on their own for fire safety, but they usually do it gently. This time it slammed with a hard, resonating bang. I rushed to that spot and pulled the door open, looking around for anyone who might have gone through. The corridor was empty. It's a short hallway, and there's no way someone could have run that fast to escape my view. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I checked the security footage the next morning. The camera showed the door slamming, but there was no one in frame. It just moved on its own. Our system records in color and decent resolution, so if someone had been there, I would have seen at least a shadow. Nothing. When I showed this to my boss, he shrugged and muttered something about air currents. He insisted the old building might have a misaligned door frame or a draft pushing it. But I've walked by that door hundreds of times, and it never slammed like that on its own, especially not with that kind of force. As the nights went on, I started noticing small details. One night I found a few bolts on the floor that weren't there before. They were lined up in a row near the shelves where I heard the first banging. Another time I saw a set of footprints in a dusty section near the eastern wall. They didn't match my shoe size or anyone else's that I knew from the factory. The pattern looked heavier, like a boot tread, and they seemed to go in a straight line, then disappear as if whoever made them had stepped onto a cleaner section of the floor. I tried to follow them, but I lost the trail. Each discovery like that made my pulse race, and I'd always scan the area for movement, but there was never anyone in sight. I started to feel on edge every evening. Even during normal hours, I'd catch myself glancing at the back shelves, expecting something to move. My nerves were shot. I'd jump at small sounds like a forklift rolling by on the other side or a pallet dropping. People began to notice I was jumpy, but I didn't want to tell them everything. I didn't want to sound paranoid or incompetent. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. I never felt threatened during the day, but at night, especially after 10 crew or so, that area felt charged with an unspoken tension. It was like I was trespassing in a place that didn't belong to me, even though I've worked there for years. About 2 weeks ago, I decided to get more serious about gathering evidence. I brought my phone and took a few videos while walking around the back area at night. I went slow, shining my flashlight on every shelf, checking behind every box that I could move. I wanted to find anything that would explain the noises. Some sections were too packed with crates for me to see behind them. I kept hearing faint clicks or taps in the distance like metal on concrete, but I couldn't confirm their source. While filming, I noticed a flicker in my phone's light at one point, like the battery was suddenly draining. Then it went back to normal. When I reviewed the video later, I saw a dark shape move for a split second near the corner of the frame. It could have been my own shadow, but the angle didn't line up with my arm or my body. It moved independently. I watched that clip over and over. It was only a fraction of a second, but something about it didn't look right. It had a shape, maybe a shoulder or part of a torso, and then it was gone. I had a chill run through me. I didn't have a rational explanation for it. Last week, I decided I'd stay until midnight if necessary. I told my wife I'd be late and made sure to prepare for a long evening. I went about my usual tasks, organizing shipping manifests, checking inventory numbers on the computer, and updating some spreadsheets. By 10 o'clock, the warehouse was empty, except for me. I put on a thick jacket, took a flashlight, and started a slow walkthrough. The place felt quiet at first. Occasionally, I'd hear a truck outside or the distant beep of a forklift from the front storage area, but that was it. Around 10:45, I heard a bang from the far corner again. This one sounded louder than usual, almost like something heavy falling. My adrenaline kicked in and I felt my heart rate spike. My palms got sweaty and I gripped the flashlight tight. I stepped onto the long central aisle that leads to the back. My footsteps seemed too loud on the concrete. There was a faint hum from the overhead lights that were still on, but most of the lights back there were turned off to save energy. I reached the corner and shone the flashlight around. Some of the boxes looked out of place, shifted from their usual spots. A few were tilted, like someone had tried to push them aside. I crouched down, looking at the floor. There were fresh scrape marks on the concrete, like something metal had been dragged. They led behind a stack of pallets. My stomach tightened. I felt the muscles in my neck tense up. I followed the marks, stepping carefully, trying not to make noise. When I rounded the pallet stack, I saw a large metal rod lying on the floor. It looked like one of those heavy support rods we use to secure tall racks. It had fresh scratches on it, and the ground under it showed lines where it had been pulled. I swung my flashlight in a wide arc. Nothing else was there. My breath was shallow, and I realized I was clenching my jaw. I stood still, listening for any hint of movement. The silence was thick. I felt like I was in a standoff with something I couldn't see. I thought about calling out again, but a part of me was afraid of what might answer. I started backing away slowly, keeping the flashlight pointed forward. Suddenly, there was another loud clang from the opposite side of the shelves, like something hitting the metal. I jumped and almost lost my grip on the light. I ran down the aisle to the other side, my heart pounding. When I got there, I found nothing but a few boxes that had shifted again, or maybe they'd been knocked slightly off the shelf. No sign of a person. I wanted to check the cameras right then, but I also didn't want to leave that area unmonitored. Eventually, I forced myself to calm down and return to my office. I locked the door behind me, checked the monitors, and saw nothing but static and empty corridors. I stayed for another hour, expecting more bangs or doors slamming. It stayed quiet, but I couldn't concentrate on paperwork. My mind raced with what could be in that warehouse. Around midnight, I decided to head home. I was exhausted and felt drained, like I'd been in a constant state of alert for hours. Now, every evening before I start my final rounds, I feel that knot in my stomach again. I check that fire door, make sure it's latched tight. I walk the perimeter with my flashlight, glancing at every corner and shadow. It's always the same story. New scratches, odd footprints, random items moved around. My boss still says it's all due to drafts or the building's age. But I know what I've seen and heard. There's something active in that place late at night. It moves along those aisles, it slams doors, and it leaves its marks on the shelves. I don't know if it's a person who somehow sneaks in or something else I can't explain. But it's there, and it seems to be getting bolder. I haven't told many people about this. I'm not looking for attention or pity. I just know that I'm the one who has to lock up each night, and I'm the one who hears those bangs when everyone else is gone. The sense of being watched never leaves me. When I walk between those tall shelves, I get this prickling sensation on my skin, like eyes following me. I still do my job. I still check the inventory, pack up shipments, send the last emails. But I also check over my shoulder more often. I keep my phone in my hand, ready to call for help if I ever see something that confirms my suspicions. So far, it's been a pattern of strange noises and moving objects. No direct confrontation, no injuries, but that doesn't make it less disturbing. Sometimes I wonder if it's a former employee who has a key, lurking for some reason I can't imagine. Or maybe a drifter who found a way to hide in the unused corners. Yet the security footage never shows a person. Just doors slamming, boxes moving, and that shadowy shape I caught a glimpse of. I've considered the idea that maybe my mind is playing tricks on me. But those new scratches and footprints are physical. They don't come from my imagination. I don't know how this will end. I might install my own small cameras in hidden spots or ask a coworker to stay late with me one night. But it's a risk to invite someone else into what feels like a tense standoff. For now, I keep doing what I must. I organize shipments, confirm orders, and do my nightly rounds with my heart in my throat. Every time I hear a clang, I stiffen. Every time I think I see movement in my peripheral vision, I spin around, flashlight ready. I know something or someone is out there. It's in the shadows between those metal racks and dusty boxes, and it's not leaving. I can't say I've ever felt fear like this before, but I'm not running away. This is my job, and until I find a way to prove what's happening, I'm stuck with it. I never thought I'd lose sleep over strange noises in a dark basement, but that's exactly what happened a few weeks after I moved into this old 2-story house. I'm 34, and I've never believed in ghosts or curses or any of that stuff. I always figured there was a reasonable explanation for everything. But the first time I heard what sounded like chains dragging across concrete at 2 in the morning, I felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't just a random clank or something that could be a pipe rattling. It was a long, drawn-out scraping noise like someone pulling heavy metal links across the floor. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it was just the house settling or maybe some rodents pushing things around. The basement is damp, cluttered, and has those stacked boxes the previous owner left behind. I don't like going down there. The walls have old peeling paint, and the floors feel cold even through shoes. There's a single bare bulb that never seems to illuminate much. The place has an awful musty smell that makes me cough if I stay too long. It's not a spot I'd spend time in voluntarily, so I just tried to pretend it didn't exist. But the noises didn't stop. After a few nights of that scraping sound, I decided to do something. It always happened between 2 and 3 in the morning. I'd be lying there in bed, half asleep, and I'd hear it again. I'd flip on the bedside lamp, listen hard, and sure enough, it would drag on for about 10 or 15 seconds. Then silence. My heart would race, and I'd feel this pressure in my chest, like I was waiting for something else to happen. The next morning, I'd wake up feeling uneasy, but part of me wondered if it was just my imagination. Maybe I was dreaming it. The next time it happened, I forced myself to get up. I was shaking a bit because the house was dark, and I had that sense of being watched even though I told myself that was ridiculous. I pulled on some sweatpants, grabbed a flashlight, and headed downstairs. My steps sounded loud on the wooden stairs. I walked through the living room and then down the narrow steps to the basement door. My grip on the doorknob felt slippery because my palms were sweating. I was determined to figure out what was going on. I thought maybe I'd find a broken pipe or some raccoon that got trapped. When I opened the basement door, I was hit by a stale, damp smell. I fumbled for the light switch. The single bulb flickered a few times before staying on. I scanned the place with my flashlight, but I didn't see any movement. No animals, no people, nothing. The boxes were piled up along the far wall, and there was an old trunk near the corner. I saw a few rusty tools and a coil of chains in one corner. They looked old and hadn't been moved in ages. I even walked over and nudged them with my foot. They were all tangled up and covered in dust. It didn't look like they'd been dragged anywhere. I stood there listening. My mouth felt dry and I could hear my own breathing. The basement was dead silent. No dripping, no squeaking. Just my breathing and the hum of the overhead bulb. I waited a minute, 2 minutes, maybe 5, but nothing happened. I checked behind some of the bigger boxes, shined my flashlight around in case something was hiding. The only things back there were cobwebs and a few old tools. I even looked at the floor to see if there were any fresh marks. I didn't notice anything unusual. Eventually, I gave up and went back upstairs. But the next night, I heard the same dragging noise again around the same time. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I got up again, but this time I didn't open the basement door. I just stood on the other side listening. I didn't hear any footsteps. I didn't hear anyone talking. I just heard that scraping noise, maybe 2 or 3 times in a row. Each time it lasted a few seconds. Then nothing. I felt this strong urge to yank open the door and run down there, but I was afraid. I'm not proud of it, but I just couldn't make myself turn the knob. It felt like if I went down there while it was happening, I'd see something I couldn't unsee. Instead, I sat there on the floor, my back against the door, until my legs started cramping. By then, it was past 3 in the morning, and the noise had stopped. I tried a different approach the next night. I went down there in the afternoon and moved some of the boxes to see if maybe a rat or something was living behind them. I didn't see any droppings or signs of animals. There were just a bunch of old books, letters, and random tools. I found some sheets of tarps, paint cans, and cleaning supplies. Everything looked like it had been sitting there for years. The concrete floor was damp in some spots, and it had a few cracks, but I didn't see any holes big enough for large animals. I even tapped on the walls with a hammer to see if there was a hollow spot. Nothing. Eventually, I gave up and put everything back. A few nights later, I decided I would hide in the basement before 2 in the morning and see if I could catch whoever or whatever was making that noise. I had to psych myself up for it because the idea of sitting down there in the dark freaked me out. But I told myself it was the only way. So around 1:30, I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and a small flashlight. I went down to the basement, turned off the overhead light, and sat behind the staircase where I'd have a view of most of the basement floor. I could feel my pulse thumping in my chest. I kept telling myself there had to be a normal explanation. I sat there for half an hour and nothing happened. The basement felt colder than usual. My breath came out in shallow bursts, and every little noise made me jump. I heard the house settling above me. I heard some creaking in the pipes, but no chains dragging. After a while, I realized it was after 2 and still nothing. My legs were stiff and my neck was sore from sitting hunched over. Another 15 minutes went by, and I was about to get up and call it a night when I heard a scraping sound. It was faint at first. I glanced around but didn't see anything move. Then it got louder, like metal scraping over rough concrete. My heart pounded in my ears. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see if anything was moving. I leaned forward a bit, careful not to make noise. The chair made a tiny squeak under me, and I froze. The chain sound grew louder, like something was dragging a heavy length of metal across the floor. It was somewhere in the center of the basement, but I couldn't see anything there. My body tensed up. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I tried to steady my breathing. Just as I was about to stand up, the noise stopped. Everything went silent. No footsteps, no click of chains settling on the floor. I just heard my own heartbeat. I stayed there waiting. A minute passed, then 2. My muscles started to cramp from holding still. Finally, I stood up slowly, using the staircase handrail to balance myself. I aimed my flashlight at the center of the basement. The floor was empty, just cracked concrete. The coil of chains in the corner looked untouched, still covered in dust. There was no sign that anything had been moved. I swallowed hard, then walked over to the center of the room. I shined my light on the floor. I saw new scratch marks on the concrete. They were thin and looked fresh, like someone had scraped metal in random lines. I crouched down, ran my finger over them. They felt rough. It sent a chill through my body, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. The marks looked like they'd been made only moments earlier, but I hadn't seen anything or anyone. I felt a strong urge to run upstairs and lock the door, but I stayed a bit longer, scanning every inch of that floor. Nothing else looked different. The chain in the corner was still coiled and dusty. The boxes were still stacked. There were no footprints, no signs of an intruder. I went back upstairs and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about those scratch marks and the sound of chains scraping. My mind went to all kinds of possibilities, from a prankster somehow sneaking in to some weird echo of a past event. I'd never believed in the paranormal, but I couldn't deny what I was experiencing. I decided I would check the public records the next day to see if anything had happened in this house before I bought it. The following morning, I went to the county office and asked for any records on the property. I found out the house was built in the 1940s and had changed hands a few times. There wasn't anything in the records about crimes or anything official involving the basement. I checked local news archives as well, but I didn't see anything that jumped out. One of the older owners defaulted on a mortgage. Another owner tried to renovate the place but gave up. There was no mention of anything violent or tragic. I went home even more confused. That night I heard the chain sound again around 2:30 in the morning. I didn't go down. I just listened from my bed. My throat felt tight and my mind was racing. I started to wonder if I was losing it or if there was some kind of leftover energy in that basement, replaying old events. I remembered reading something about how some places have residual sounds or images that repeat like a recording, but I didn't want to get lost in those thoughts. All I knew was that I heard what I heard, and I saw those scratch marks. They weren't my imagination. Over the next few nights, I tried a few more stakeouts in the basement. I brought my phone to record any sounds. On 2 occasions, I caught that dragging noise in the distance. But on playback, it just sounded like faint scraping. No voices, no other interference. I kept a flashlight pointed at the coil of chains whenever I was down there, but I never saw them move. They stayed in place, covered in dust. Yet almost every morning after hearing the sounds, I'd go down and find new scratch marks in the floor. Some were deeper than others. It was like someone had taken those chains and dragged them across the concrete, then put them back perfectly. I started having trouble focusing at work. My boss asked if I was sleeping okay. I said I was just stressed out about home repairs. I didn't want to admit I was terrified of some unknown force in my basement. I considered selling the house, but I'd only been there a few months and I had put all my savings into it. I also wasn't sure if I'd even be able to sell it quickly. And besides, part of me felt compelled to figure this out. I didn't want to run away. This was my house now. One night, I tried a different approach. I borrowed a motion sensor camera from a friend who likes to watch wildlife in his backyard. I set it up near the staircase so it faced the center of the basement. I turned off the light, made sure the camera was on, and went upstairs. My heart raced as I lay in bed thinking about what the camera might capture. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the chains scraping again. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I didn't dare go down until after 3. My skin was clammy and my nerves were on edge. Finally, around 3:30, I crept downstairs. The basement light felt harsher than usual. The chair I'd set up for the camera was still in place. The camera was still there too, blinking on standby. I checked the floor, and sure enough, there were fresh scratch marks. They looked like someone had raked the chain back and forth in a short line. I grabbed the camera, hurried upstairs, and locked the basement door. My hands were shaking as I hooked the camera up to my laptop. I played the footage back. My gut tightened as I waited. The basement looked grainy in night vision. I saw nothing for a while, just the empty basement. Then around 2-something in the morning, the camera shook a little, like it registered some movement. but there was nothing in the frame. I could hear the chain scraping loud and clear, but I didn't see anything. There was just an empty shot of the basement floor, exactly how I'd left it. No figure, no shadow, no chain moving by itself. Yet the audio picked up that distinct metallic scraping. I stared at the video, replaying it a dozen times, trying to see if there was a flicker of movement I missed. There was nothing, just that noise, echoing through the empty space. I felt my stomach turn. That confirmed it wasn't in my head. I really captured the sound. But there was no logical explanation for how those marks ended up on the floor without something physically moving the chains. I spent the rest of the night wide awake with the lights on, feeling my heart pounding every time I imagined that noise. Now I still live here. The noises haven't stopped. Every few nights, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning, I hear the chains dragging across the basement floor. I've learned to live with it, but I haven't figured it out. The marks keep appearing. I've tried moving the chain to a locked cabinet, but that doesn't make a difference. The scraping noise happens anyway. Then I find fresh scratches when I check. It's like there's some leftover piece of the past stuck on a loop. I don't know how to break it. I don't know who else to ask. All I have is that camera footage and the knowledge that I'm not making this up. I've stopped doing long stakeouts in the basement. It's too exhausting. I've tried sleeping with earplugs, but I still feel a vibration when the chain is dragged. It rattles me awake. I've had a couple of friends come over, but the noises never happen when they're around. It's always just me, alone, in the early hours of the morning. I'm not sure what to do next. All I know is that my basement has these unexplained events, and I can't figure out why. I haven't told anyone else because I don't want them to think I'm losing it. But every time I close my eyes at night, I picture those chains scraping along the concrete, marking it, leaving behind fresh evidence that something unseen is down there. And that's my life now. I live in an old house with a basement that refuses to stay quiet in the dead of night. I never thought a security camera on my porch would become my biggest source of stress. I installed it to feel safer. I wanted to get alerts when someone approached my house at odd hours. I live alone, and I'm 37, so I figured a modern security system might help me sleep better. At first, I got a few false alarms because bugs would fly in front of the lens. That was annoying, but I learned to ignore them. Then around 3 in the morning last week, I got a notification on my phone. I checked the live feed and saw something that made my heart pound. It looked like a person standing on my porch, leaning in at a strange angle. The face wasn't visible, the figure didn't move, and I couldn't make out any clothing details. Suddenly, the camera feed shook, went black for a few seconds, and then came back. The porch was empty when the feed returned. I didn't know what to think. I remember sitting in my living room staring at the phone screen with sweaty palms. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't move for maybe half a minute, just looking at the empty porch on my screen. The motion alert had been triggered for a reason. I tried to play back the recording, hoping I could pause it and see some detail about the intruder's clothes or face. The clip was short and the video froze every time I tried to zoom in. It glitched out, showed a green bar, and then the file went blank. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I'm not used to feeling vulnerable in my own home, but that night I locked every window and door twice. Then I sat in my bedroom, listening for any noise outside, until the sky started to lighten. I barely slept at all. The next day I told myself it might be some kind of software bug or a stray reflection. I tried to rationalize it. I've had false alerts before, so maybe the camera was malfunctioning. Still, I couldn't ignore the fact that I saw a human outline. It wasn't just a weird shape or a bug this time. It looked real. I decided to test the camera during the day, waving my hand in front of it and checking the footage. It worked fine. Everything was sharp. No glitches, no weird corruption. I went back to the night footage. Same error when I zoomed in. I went outside, walked around the porch, looked for footprints, scuff marks, or something that would show someone had been there. I found nothing. The gate was locked. The area around my porch was dusty, and I saw my own footprints from the day before, but there were no fresh ones. I couldn't figure out how someone could have gotten in or out without leaving any trace. A few days later, I was tossing and turning in bed and got another alert around 3 a.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. My mouth felt dry, and my hands shook a bit as I grabbed the phone. The live feed connected. At first, I saw nothing but the empty porch. Then something flickered at the bottom of the frame, like a leg stepping forward. I leaned closer to the screen. There it was, that same shape. It was angled sideways this time, arms hanging at its sides, head slightly tilted. I couldn't see a face, but there was a distinct outline of a head and shoulders. It stood there for 2 or 3 seconds, and then the image broke up. When the feed resumed, the porch was empty again. I felt my stomach churn, and I started to sweat. I slipped out of bed and checked the locks on my doors, opened the curtains and looked out onto the dark street. No one was there. I felt a heaviness in my chest that wouldn't go away. I tried watching the recorded clip that same night. The file was 10 seconds long, but it only showed about 2 seconds of clear video. The rest was static and noise. The motion was just enough to see that shape, but no details. I stayed up until dawn again, waiting to see if there would be another alert. None came. At work the next day, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept going back to that figure. Who could it be? Why would they appear at the same time each night? And how were they messing with my camera feed? Or was it some random glitch that happened to look like a person? A few more nights passed quietly. I started thinking maybe it was over. Then I got another alert. Same time, same routine. I checked the porch, saw that shape for a moment, and the feed cut out. By this point, I was running out of ideas. I started searching online for camera interference issues, tried different Wi-Fi channels, and even swapped the memory card in the camera. Nothing changed. Every daytime recording was perfect. Every nighttime recording showed the same bizarre distortion whenever that figure appeared. I called the camera's customer service line. They went through a generic checklist and told me to reinstall the app. That did nothing. I decided to get more proactive. I bought another camera from a different brand and mounted it on the other side of the porch. I made sure it had a separate power line and a different memory card. I wanted to see if maybe the first camera was faulty. The next night, around 3 a.m., I got 2 notifications at once, one from each camera. My chest felt like it had a heavy weight on it as I grabbed my phone. I opened the first camera's app. Same shape, same glitch. Then it cut out. I quickly opened the second camera's app. Nothing. I switched back to the first app, but it was stuck buffering. When it finally reconnected, the porch was empty. Then I checked the recordings from the second camera. It recorded the same time period, but all I saw was an empty porch. There was no figure. It was as if nothing had triggered the motion sensor, even though it clearly did. The second camera's history showed the alert, but no visible shape. It was like the figure was invisible to that camera, but not to the original one. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My hands started shaking, and I sat down on the edge of my couch with the phone in my hand. I kept thinking someone might be messing with me. But how would they do that without leaving footprints or forcing the gate open? I called a friend who lives across town and told him what was happening. He suggested that maybe it was a trick of the light or a glitch that came from the environment, like a reflection off my front window. We ended up on the phone for an hour, going over every possibility. But I knew I wasn't imagining this. Something kept showing up on my porch around the same time each night. Over the next few days, my life revolved around these camera alerts. I started staying up late on purpose, sitting in the dark, watching the live feed on my phone. Sometimes I'd hear a faint crackling sound through the camera microphone right before the image froze. Other times I'd see a blur but not the full outline. I tried to open the door and check in person once. I stood there, phone in hand, my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I reached for the doorknob. My hand was trembling. The moment I turned the knob, my camera alert went off. I looked at the live feed, and the figure was on the screen again, almost pressed against the camera. I froze. Part of me wanted to swing the door open and confront whoever or whatever it was, but my body refused to move. I just stared at the phone. The feed cut out, came back, and I was left looking at an empty porch again. I tried to examine the videos frame by frame on my computer. Each time I reached the moment the figure appeared, the file got corrupted. If I skipped that spot, it would play fine. But if I tried to pause on the figure, the video player would freeze. I looked for data in the file properties, but there was nothing unusual. It all felt like a dead end. My friend offered to come stay with me for a few nights, but I turned him down. I felt awkward about it. I still felt responsible for my own space. I just wanted this to stop. One night, I set an alarm for 2:50 a.m. and woke up on the couch. I was already sweating when I opened my eyes. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera feed. At first, it was just my empty porch under the faint glow of the porch light. I tried to stay calm, telling myself the figure might not show up if I was actively watching. Then, at exactly 3:02 a.m., I saw a flicker in the top corner of the screen. It was like a flickering shadow. Then the outline formed, the same posture, leaning forward. My stomach lurched. I felt a chill all over my body. I could see the shape slowly tilt its head, as if noticing the camera. I heard a soft static noise from the speaker, and then the feed glitched out again. I set my phone down and stared at the door. I wanted to run outside, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My pulse was racing, my breath was shallow, and my mouth was completely dry. I was afraid to even look through the peephole. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom after that. I spent my nights on the couch, half awake, with the phone in my hand. Every creak of the house made me jump. Sometimes I heard a faint tapping noise out by the porch, but I didn't check. I just stayed there, heart racing, until morning came. My body felt stiff all day, like I was bracing for an impact that never came. I tried calling a local home security company, thinking maybe they could install better cameras or do a professional sweep. They offered me an appointment a week later. That felt like a lifetime. I started dreading the nights. I felt exhausted, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that shape on my porch standing still, looking directly at my camera. I wondered if it was looking at me too. My phone would vibrate with an alert, and I'd flinch so hard my muscles ached. Half the time, I couldn't even bring myself to open the app right away. I'd let the phone buzz, my heart pounding in my ears, until I finally summoned the nerve to see what the camera caught. Sometimes it was a bug, sometimes nothing at all. But whenever that shape appeared, the same pattern happened. It showed up for a few seconds, the feed cut, and I was left with another corrupted video file. There were no footprints in the morning, no scratches on the door, no signs of forced entry. It drove me crazy. I tried changing the camera angle. I moved it higher, then lower, then to the side, but the results stayed the same. I even put a heavy-duty floodlight on the porch, thinking maybe I could get a better look. But on the nights when that shape arrived, the floodlight flickered or shut off for a moment, then came back on after the feed recovered. During the day, the floodlight worked perfectly. That pattern repeated, and I had no explanation for it. Last night, the alert came through again right at 3:05 a.m. I was already half awake on the couch. My phone was on the coffee table. I watched the screen light up with a single message: motion detected. My hand was shaking as I picked it up. When I opened the app, the porch was in view, but the floodlight was dim, like it was losing power. The silhouette was there, leaning slightly forward. I noticed it seemed taller than before, but maybe that was just my nerves. I heard a crackling sound through the speaker, and I could feel my heart hammering. My chest was tight, and I could barely breathe. The shape didn't move, but the camera feed started to go fuzzy. The screen pixelated, froze, and then went black. After a few seconds, it came back. The porch was empty, and the floodlight returned to full brightness. I realized I was shaking, and my forehead was drenched in sweat. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Now I'm sitting here in my living room, typing this out on my laptop while I watch the camera feeds. It's almost midnight, and my pulse is racing even though nothing has happened yet. I keep checking the doors and windows, making sure they're locked. I can't find any logical explanation for what's happening. There are no footprints. There are no signs of anyone climbing the fence or tampering with the lock. The videos always corrupt at the exact moment the figure appears. My second camera refuses to pick up any trace of it. The new floodlight flickers only when the shape is there. I can't explain any of it, and I've stopped trying to find a neat reason for it. All I know is that every night around 3 in the morning, something shows up on my porch. It looks like a person, but it never leaves any proof behind. The only evidence is in those corrupted clips. I'm scared to open the camera app tonight. My hands are already clammy and my shoulders feel stiff. My back aches from all the nights I've spent on this couch, too anxious to move. Every time I close my eyes, I see that shape. And every time my phone buzzes, my heart jumps into my throat. I'm wondering if it will ever stop, but it's almost 3 a.m. now. I'm staring at the camera feed, waiting for that alert. My phone is on the coffee table. I don't know if I have the nerve to pick it up when it goes off again, but I know I will, because I have to see. I have to know if it's really there, or if I'm just losing my mind. It's quiet right now, but I know that any second, the alert will pop up. And I'll look, just like I always do, and the figure will be there, leaning in, silent, and unidentifiable. Then the feed will cut out again, and I'll be left with no answers. That's my life now, every single night, alone in this house. I was never the kind of guy who jumped at shadows. I handled pressure well. I traveled a lot, met different clients every week, and got used to strange motels, random airports, and new cities. But then I started getting these calls on my personal cell phone. The display showed nothing, no number, no data, just a blank screen. At first I thought it was some glitch, but every time I answered, the call went straight to my voicemail. No ringing, no chance to pick up. Only a message waiting for me. The first time it happened, I was in a hotel room in Dallas. I had just finished dinner at a nearby steakhouse and got back to my room around 9 p.m. I tossed my jacket on the chair, kicked off my shoes, and felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. When I pulled it out, the screen showed an incoming call, but there was no number. I pressed the green button to answer. The line went dead. Then the voicemail notification popped up. I didn't think much of it, so I checked the message. A voice whispered, "You were at the Green Valley rest stop last week." Then it repeated my full name. I remember my pulse pounding in my ears. There was no reason for anyone to mention that rest stop. I'd grabbed a quick coffee there on my drive between two cities. It wasn't somewhere I'd told people about. That whisper rattled me. I replayed the message a few times just to see if I'd imagined it. It was a low, scratchy voice. It sounded strained, like the person was out of breath or had a throat infection. It called me by my full name, first and last, and then brought up this rest stop from out of nowhere. I called my phone carrier right away. The representative put me on hold, came back and said there were no records of a call at that time. I asked how that was possible. She had no explanation and gave me the usual script about checking phone settings or updating my software. That didn't help at all. That night I tried to dismiss it. I told myself it was probably a prank or someone who got my information through a friend, but my gut was tense. I left the TV on while I tried to sleep. I listened for any noise outside my door, half expecting something weird to happen. Nothing else did, but I woke up every hour or so checking my phone out of habit. A few days later, I was back in my hometown. I live alone in a small apartment with thin walls. I can usually hear my neighbor's TV or footsteps in the hallway. That night it was quiet. Around midnight my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Same deal, no missed call, no number. My heart pounded as I tapped on the new message. The same voice whispered, "You stayed at that roadside motel near Rockford, you remember the one?" Then it said my full name again. My palms got sweaty. I could feel my chest getting tight. I looked around my living room, expecting to see someone peeking through the window, but I saw nothing. just the streetlights outside and a few parked cars along the road. I started questioning everything. I remembered that motel in Rockford. It was a small, rundown place with flickering neon signs and thin blankets. I'd spent one night there when I got stuck between meetings. I never told anyone because it wasn't worth mentioning. How did this voice know? It was creepy, but it felt invasive too, like someone had followed me there. I tried calling the operator again. They repeated the same line about no records of these calls. I felt my stomach turning. I realized I might be dealing with something more complicated than a prank. That night, I deleted the message because I couldn't stand the idea of listening to it again. Over the next week, I traveled to 3 cities for work. I visited clients in small industrial parks and saw the usual stuff. Fluorescent lit conference rooms, coffee in styrofoam cups, a lot of paperwork. I felt on edge the entire time, glancing at my phone every few minutes. I blocked unknown numbers. I asked the company IT department to check my phone for viruses or spyware. They didn't find anything unusual. They just told me to keep my software up to date. Then came another voicemail. This time I was walking through a parking lot outside a big box store after a meeting with a regional manager. My phone chimed, and I froze. I looked at the screen, and it only showed a voicemail icon. I swear my hands shook as I brought the phone to my ear. I heard the same raspy whisper. "You visited your old company's branch at 1107 Riverside. No one goes there anymore. You remember?" Hearing that address made my hair stand up on the back of my neck. That building was shut down years ago. I worked there when I first started in this business. It was in the next state over. I hadn't talked about that branch in a long time. The voice repeated my full name again, stretching it out, almost hissing. I clenched my phone and looked around the parking lot. People were pushing carts, chatting, or getting into their cars. Everything seemed normal. But I felt watched, like someone was standing behind me. But I couldn't see who it was. I hurried to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I sat there with the engine off, just breathing hard and staring at my phone. I played the message one more time, then deleted it. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? There was no phone number, no actual threat, just a weird whisper telling me about places I'd been. Back at my hotel that night, I tried to distract myself with the TV and some takeout. My appetite was gone. I paced around my room, checking the door chain and the window lock. When my phone buzzed, I nearly jumped out of my shoes. It was just a text from a colleague confirming a meeting, but my nerves were shot. I considered turning my phone off, but I rely on it for work. I need to be reachable, so I left it on. The calls kept coming, usually once every few days. Each time, the voice mentioned a different location from my past. Sometimes it was a hotel I used to frequent when I first started in sales. Other times, it was a roadside diner in some town I hadn't thought about in years. The details were always accurate, and the voice always said my name at the start. I started sleeping with the phone in silent mode, hoping that would keep me from jumping every time a new voicemail arrived. But every morning, I woke up with a new message waiting. During one trip, I found myself in a small town outside Pittsburgh. I checked into a modest place off the freeway. Brown carpets, dim lights in the hall, the kind of place I'd normally consider a quick pit stop. As soon as I settled in, I heard my phone vibrate on the nightstand. I looked over and saw a new voicemail notification. My heart pounded. I stared at the phone for at least a minute before pressing play. The voice whispered, "You're in room 214 right now." I dropped the phone. I actually let it slip out of my hand and hit the floor. My entire body felt cold. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw an empty hallway. I checked the window. It overlooked the parking lot. The only motion outside was a guy walking a dog near the grass. I wasn't sure what to do, so I just grabbed my car keys and left. I headed to the front desk and asked if anyone had asked about me. The clerk shook his head. He looked puzzled, like he couldn't figure out why I was so agitated. I went back to my room and shut the door. I put a chair against it, even though I didn't really think that would help. My hands shook so badly that I could barely open a water bottle. That night, I lay in bed with the lights on. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the next call. I felt exhausted. My legs were restless. My back ached from tension. I woke up around 3 a.m. and checked my phone. Another voicemail. This time the voice said, "I saw you check in. You're not alone." I didn't know what that meant. It sounded like a warning or maybe just a way to make me paranoid. I deleted it and tried to force myself back to sleep. The next morning, I checked out early and drove to my next meeting. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and my head throbbed. I drank coffee after coffee, trying to stay alert. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, as if someone might be following me on the highway, but every car looked normal. At one point, I pulled into a rest area and tried to calm down. I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked drained, with dark circles under my eyes. I told myself I needed to keep it together. I had deals to close and a schedule to maintain. That afternoon, I arrived at a client's office. I had to focus on the sales pitch, show them the presentation, and talk about our products. My mind kept drifting to my phone. I had it on silent, sitting face down on the conference table next to my laptop. Several times I glanced at the screen, half expecting another voicemail notification, but nothing came in. I felt a wave of relief mixed with dread. I wanted it to stop, but I also knew it would probably come back. After the meeting, I headed to a local diner with one of my coworkers. We talked about ordinary stuff, job quotas, the next quarter, upcoming trade shows. I tried to act normal. I forced myself to eat a burger and fries. My coworker asked if I was feeling all right. I guess I looked stressed. I shrugged it off and said I was just tired. When we left, I saw that I had a missed call, no number, plus a voicemail. I didn't listen to it then. I waited until I was alone in my car. The message was short. "You can't hide from me." Hearing that made my skin prickle. There was no mention of my location or my name this time. Just that sentence in that same low, raspy tone. I felt my breaths getting shorter. My heart was hammering in my chest. I wiped sweat off my forehead and stared at the phone. I had no clue who or what was doing this. I couldn't track it. The operator had no record. My company IT guys said my phone was clean. Friends told me to ignore it or change my number. But this was my personal number, and I'd used it for years. Changing it would be a massive inconvenience, and it wasn't guaranteed to help. For the next few days, I tried to keep busy. I kept up with client meetings and avoided spending too much time alone in my hotel rooms. I'd go out for dinner with coworkers or wander around crowded areas in the evenings, just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. Each night, I checked my voicemail. Most times, there was a new message waiting. The voice kept bringing up old places, or it would say something about where I was right then, like, "Your rental car is parked in spot C17, or "That bar you're leaving doesn't serve good bourbon." Every time I felt my pulse race. I felt like someone had latched onto my back and wouldn't let go. I thought about contacting a private investigator, but I didn't have enough concrete details. My phone log showed nothing. The caller ID showed nothing. I had no pattern to track, no real lead. It was like punching at a ghost. Last night I got home after a long drive. My body felt stiff from sitting in the car, and I just wanted to drop onto my couch. I carried my bags up the stairs, unlocked my apartment, and stepped inside. My phone chimed with a voicemail. It was the same voice. It said, "I know you're home." I could hear my breath quickening, a nervous sound in my throat. I locked my door, turned on every light in the living room, and set my bags down carefully. My fingers twitched with anxiety. I played the message again to be sure. There was no mistake. Right now, I'm sitting at my kitchen table with my phone in front of me. I've checked every closet, every corner, every window. I haven't seen anyone. I don't know where to turn next. The phone company says I'm imagining these calls. My coworkers don't know what to tell me. I'm worried that if I keep traveling, I'll keep getting these messages and that it might escalate. I can't figure out who would even care about all the random places I've been. I have no big secrets or enemies. I'm just a sales rep who logs a lot of miles. I'm writing this all down because I want to keep my thoughts straight. I can't sleep. Every time the phone buzzes, I feel my heart jump. I might change my number, but I suspect that whoever's behind this will find me again. They know too much. They track me everywhere. I'm not sure how and I'm not sure why. All I know is that every new message confirms one thing. Someone, or something, is following me. And they make sure I know it every time they whisper my name. I never paid much attention to weird hotel stories before. I've stayed in so many places for work that I lost count. I'd heard about strange noises, flickering lights, or odd drafts in hallways, but I always brushed that stuff off. It all changed when I checked into this quiet, unremarkable hotel on a Monday evening. I was there for a 3-day consulting gig at a small manufacturing company in town. The place looked normal. The lobby was tidy, the staff was polite, and the room was simple but clean. It felt safe enough. But then I started hearing those whispers. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was sitting at the small desk in my room, flipping through some notes from the client. It was around 9 at night. The air conditioning was humming, blowing a steady stream of slightly cool air. Out of nowhere, I heard a low mumble. It was so faint that I paused, thinking, maybe I was just tired. I kept still, holding my breath. Then I heard it again. Soft, indistinct whispers like two people talking in hushed voices. I leaned closer to the vent. The sound seemed to come directly from the grate. I got up, pressed my ear against the metal, and tried to listen. It was almost too soft to make out. There weren't clear words, just a repetitive pattern of sounds that felt like speech. For a second, I thought it could be a TV in the next room, but it didn't quite match that. It wasn't the muffled noise of a television or casual conversation. It had a weird rhythm. I shook my head, thinking I was just exhausted. I flicked off the air conditioner to see if that changed anything. The hum stopped, but the whispers seemed to continue. It was faint, but still there. I shrugged, decided I was overthinking it, and turned the AC back on. I went to brush my teeth, tried to calm my nerves, and told myself it was just the building's ventilation system carrying sounds from somewhere else. The second night, the whispers got louder, or at least they seemed more constant. I was lying in bed, flipping channels on the TV. There was no interesting show on, so I turned it off. That's when I realized the room wasn't silent. There was that same hushed tone coming from the vent. I stood up and walked over. I lifted my hand and felt the cool air blowing. Beneath that soft rush, there was a murmuring sound. It was like something was traveling through the ductwork. I got down on my knees to check if maybe a piece of paper was stuck inside, or if there was a small object that could create a whistling noise. I couldn't see much, though. It was just the dark interior of a metal vent, full of dust and shadows. I called the front desk and explained, "I hear some odd noise coming from the air conditioner. It sounds like whispering." The manager sounded confused. He mentioned there were no other complaints and offered to send a maintenance guy the next day. I thanked him and hung up. That night I couldn't sleep well. I kept hearing the whispering like it was directly under the white noise of the AC's airflow. It made my heart pound. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing in the corner of the room, leaning in, watching. At one point, I snapped my eyes open and looked around. The room was empty. The only movement was the curtains shifting slightly, stirred by the air. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was close by. My breathing got shallow and my palms felt sweaty. I forced myself to lie down and close my eyes again, but my muscles were tense, like I was bracing for something. The next day at work, I felt distracted. I had a meeting with the client's director, and halfway through I realized I had missed half of what he was saying. My mind kept drifting back to the hotel room. I found myself dreading the moment I'd have to go back there. I normally don't get creeped out by this sort of thing. I've heard strange plumbing noises and squeaky pipes in older hotels. This was different. The persistent whispers, so constant, so close to my ears, just felt off. When I returned that evening, the manager met me at the front desk. He said the maintenance guy checked the vent and found nothing unusual. No loose parts, no debris, no reason for a weird sound. I insisted there was a noise. He gave me a polite nod and said he believed me, but there was nothing he could pinpoint. I shrugged and went up to my room. It was the same story. The moment I turned on the AC, I heard the faint whispering. Even when I switched it off, the whispering still lingered, but it was even softer, as if the forced air was carrying it more strongly. I tried to drown it out with music on my phone, but whenever I took my earbuds out, it was still there. Over dinner, I thought about what it could be. Maybe a design flaw in the ductwork was amplifying voices from a distant room. Maybe there was some mechanical glitch that produced a noise that sounded like speech. I focused on logical explanations, but none of them fully convinced me. Despite myself, I was growing uneasy. My stomach felt tight. My appetite was off. That night, I was dead tired. All I wanted was a few hours of sleep. I tried ignoring the whispers. I turned on the TV for background noise and lay in bed. Sometime around midnight, I jolted awake. I was sweating. I had this intense feeling that someone was standing at the foot of my bed. My heart hammered. My breathing was ragged. I scanned the room. Nothing. It was dark except for the faint glow from the alarm clock. The curtains were drawn, and the AC was still humming. But I swore I saw a shadow move near the window. I flicked on the lamp. There was nobody there. The chair in the corner was empty. The small closet door was shut. Nothing was out of place. I sat up, pressing my palm to my forehead, trying to calm myself down. My skin felt clammy. My t-shirt was damp. And through the quiet of the room, I heard it again, the whispers like a broken record of soft voices. They sounded almost urgent. At that point, I felt genuine fear. The next morning, I went straight to the manager and asked for a room change. I told him I couldn't deal with the constant noise in the vent. He was surprised by how shaken I seemed. He offered me another room at the opposite end of the hallway. I packed my suitcase and moved over. The new room looked pretty much the same. Same size, same layout, just a different view of the parking lot. I let out a relieved sigh, hoping this would solve everything. That evening, I settled into the new room. I turned on the AC, hoping to feel a normal rush of air without strange undertones. For a while it was quiet. I actually started to relax. I sat on the bed, reading through some notes, and eventually flicked on the TV. Around 10 p.m., I shut the TV off. As soon as silence fell across the room, I heard it again. Low, soft whispers coming from the vent. I froze. It was like the same pattern. The same repeated mumbling that I couldn't fully decipher. My heart pounded, and my scalp started to tingle. I leaned closer to the AC unit. Same noise. I paced the room, going back and forth between the bed and the bathroom. I double-checked the hallway outside. Everything was quiet. No housekeeping cart, no guests talking in the corridor. I pressed my ear against the wall separating my room from the next. I heard nothing. Only when I got near the air conditioner again did I pick up that subtle murmur. It sounded almost like it was calling my name. Not loudly, not in a clear voice, but the pattern had that cadence. I grabbed my phone and recorded a short clip, hoping to capture the sound. When I played it back, I only heard a faint hiss of white noise. The whispers didn't come through clearly. That didn't help my case. If I tried to show it to the manager, he'd just hear static. So I decided I would just endure it for one more night. My client only needed me for a few more hours of work the next day. Then I could check out and never set foot in this place again. I took a quick shower. As I stood under the water, I kept thinking I heard a voice in the steam. I was so jumpy by then that every small sound made me tense. The dripping of the faucet, the squeak of my wet feet on the tiles, each noise put me on edge. When I got out, I dried off, threw on some pajamas, and climbed into bed. I pulled the blankets up to my chest, flicked off the lamp, and tried to sleep. The AC cycled on and off, and each time it started blowing, the whispering picked up. I tossed and turned, punching my pillow, trying to find a comfortable position. I was sure I wouldn't sleep, but eventually, fatigue caught up with me. I woke up around 3 a.m. to pitch darkness. The AC was off. I realized the room felt stuffy. I squinted at the digital clock's red numbers. That's when the hair on my arm stood on end. The AC was off, but I still heard the whispers. They were clear. It was like someone was standing right beside the bed, breathing words I couldn't fully understand. I sat up, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. I reached for the lamp and flicked it on. The room was empty. Nothing was behind the curtains or under the bed. I felt sweat rolling down the sides of my face. My throat was dry. I jumped up, pulled on a pair of jeans, and grabbed my phone. I stepped out into the hallway. It was silent. The lights were dim. I paced for a bit, looking at the other doors. No one else seemed awake. I considered going downstairs to the lobby, but I felt stupid. What could I say? That the whispers followed me to a new room? That I was hearing my name in the air vents at 3 in the morning? The manager already told me no other guests had complained. For a moment, I thought I might be losing my mind. Maybe stress was messing with me. But the sound felt too real, too consistent. I stayed out in the hall for a few minutes, taking slow breaths. My hands were shaking. Eventually, I went back inside and left the overhead light on. I stayed awake, sitting in the chair by the desk, half dozing until dawn. Every so often, I heard a faint rustle from the vent, like a gentle breeze. The whispers were still there, hovering at the edge of my hearing. I refused to look toward the bed because I kept imagining someone standing there. At first light, I packed my things. I went downstairs, eyes burning from lack of sleep. I told the manager I had to leave early, that my work was done. He looked at me in surprise. He asked if everything was okay. I could tell by the concern on his face that I must have looked terrible. I shook my head and said I just needed to go. He gave a small nod, apologized for any inconvenience, and handed me the final bill. I walked out of that hotel feeling shaky, as if I'd escaped something I couldn't explain. My heart was still racing. I loaded my suitcase into my rental car and sat behind the wheel, feeling like I needed to double-check the back seat. I started the car and glanced in the rearview mirror. Of course, the back seat was empty. I felt embarrassed by my paranoia, but I also felt relief. I was done with that place. That evening, I reached another town for my next consulting job. It was a nicer hotel, bigger lobby, more people around. I took the elevator to my floor, opened the door to my new room, and switched on the lights. I hesitated before turning on the air conditioner. My pulse thudded in my ears. Finally, I pressed the button. The machine whirred to life. I stood there listening hard. It was just normal air blowing. No odd noise, no murmuring. The tension drained out of my shoulders. For the first time in days, I felt something close to normal. Still, when I lay down that night, I couldn't get the memory of those whispers out of my mind. The way they seemed to follow me, the way it almost sounded like they were speaking directly to me. It stayed with me. Even now, I think about it whenever I check into a new hotel. I always pause by the air conditioner listening. Most of the time, I just hear a steady whoosh of air and a rattle of old machinery. But a small part of me is always waiting to hear that same hushed voice again. And honestly, that lingering thought is enough to make my skin crawl. I pushed open the rusted gate and stepped onto the cracked sidewalk. It was late, and I felt the soreness in my legs from a long day at work. My shirt clung to my back. My mouth was dry. I just wanted to get home. I saw a narrow street ahead, barely lit by a flickering lamppost. I thought it would save me some time if I took a shortcut. I wasn't even thinking about the condition of the area. I just wanted to reach my apartment sooner. That was my plan. I had no idea I'd end up in a place that still makes me breathe faster when I remember it. I walked down that street and noticed a 2-story house with broken steps and wide-open windows. The place stood out because the other buildings on the block looked empty and there were no lights on. This one had some faint glow coming from inside. The windows were open, and the music I heard felt old. It was scratchy. I heard it like someone had turned on a very old radio or a record player. I stopped in front of the house. I felt a chill run up my arms. The temperature on that street was cooler than anywhere else I'd been that night. I couldn't ignore that music, though. It was the only sign of life, and I wanted to see if someone needed help or if something strange was going on. I stepped onto the porch. My shoes pressed against loose planks. They squeaked beneath me. The front door was cracked open, hanging from one hinge that looked like it was about to snap. I heard that music more clearly at the threshold. I wanted to call out, but my throat felt tight. I just raised my hand and knocked on the door frame. I heard nothing but the music. I decided to push the door open. As soon as I walked in, the doors slammed behind me with a force that made me jump. The noise rang through my ears. It sounded like someone had kicked the doors shut, but I saw nobody. I turned around and pulled on the handles. They wouldn't budge. The house seemed to trap me inside. I felt the floor beneath me shift. Some of the boards sank a bit under my weight. My heart started pounding. I remembered that the steps outside looked beat up. I worried the floor might cave in altogether. I tried stepping away from the door, but the floor was weak there too. I heard the wood creak and saw deep cracks forming. A chunk of the floor broke and fell, revealing the darkness beneath the house. I pulled back before I fell in. A musty smell rose from that hole. It reminded me of rotten debris or maybe moldy walls. I took shallow breaths because I didn't like how stale the air felt. I tried to see if there was another exit. I spotted a hallway to my right and a staircase straight ahead. The music was faint, but it still played from somewhere upstairs. The hallway on my right was pitch black and I could barely make out any doors. I took a few steps toward the stairs, hoping to find a phone or maybe a back door on the second floor. As I moved, I heard a strange chanting sound. It wasn't a melody I recognized. It was more like voices speaking some lines in a slow, distorted way. The voices echoed. They seemed to come from different rooms at once. I kept going forward. Each step on the staircase felt unsteady. My body tensed as I held the rickety railing. The wood felt rough under my hands. I reached the top of the stairs and found a long corridor. The walls had peeling wallpaper. It looked like it had once been a pale floral pattern, but I couldn't see it well. My flashlight on my phone was dim. My battery was low, and the screen flickered. I scanned the corridor. The music sounded closer, but I couldn't pinpoint the exact room. I tried doors on each side. Most were locked. One door opened with a loud scraping noise. It revealed a small closet with old coats and boxes. The smell was heavy with dust. I sneezed once and almost dropped my phone. I heard my own footsteps echo. The sound was louder than it should have been. It was like more feet were moving behind me. I stopped and looked over my shoulder, but I saw nobody there. My breathing got heavier. I tried to push away the idea that something was following me. I walked down the corridor and realized it seemed longer than it looked from the stairs. I had counted maybe 4 doors when I started, but now I saw more doors. They lined both sides, and the corridor stretched farther than it should. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned around to check how far I'd come. The stairs seemed farther away than before. It didn't make sense. I heard the chanting again. It rose and fell in a slow pattern. It sounded like a broken record playing some old choir. The voices were muffled, but I could tell they were coming from a large room ahead. I pressed on. My heart thumped against my ribs. I felt sweat dripping down my temples. I tried to calm myself by breathing through my nose, but my nose was clogged by the thick air. My mouth felt dry and my hands shook a bit. At the end of the corridor, I found a set of double doors. They were made of dark wood. One of them had a cracked panel, and the other had a rusty handle that looked like it would crumble if I yanked too hard. I put my hand on it slowly and applied some pressure. The door opened inward with a loud creak. I poked my head in first, shining my phone flashlight around. The room was empty except for a chandelier in the center. The floor was dusty, and I saw footprints that ended in the middle of the room. They seemed fresh, like someone had walked there recently. The music sounded clearer, but there was no radio or record player in sight. The chanting came from behind the walls, or at least that's how it sounded. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me again. My nerves were on edge. I decided to move toward the footprints. I wanted to see if there was a clue there. The dust swirled around my ankles. My shoes left marks behind me. I saw my footprints alongside the ones that were already there, and it felt weird. The footprints were small and spaced closely, like someone walked with short, careful steps. I bent down to check if there was anything else unusual about them. They looked like normal shoes, nothing monstrous about them. Suddenly, the chandelier above me started shaking. The metal parts clinked together and some dust fell from the ceiling. I jumped back, nearly losing my balance. I looked up and saw the chain twisting. It felt like something had grabbed the chandelier and spun it. Then it became still again. My stomach felt tight and my hands were sweaty. I tried to figure out if there was wind or some draft, but I couldn't feel any breeze. I heard a loud thump from the corner of the room. I spun around, shining my phone light there. I saw a door that I hadn't noticed before. It was narrow and had a simple wooden frame. It looked unlocked. I heard the chanting coming from inside that space. The door rattled a bit. I didn't want to open it, but I also didn't want to stay in the empty room with the shaking chandelier. I swallowed hard and walked over. My phone battery icon flashed red. I cursed under my breath and opened the door. Inside, I found a set of stairs going down. The air smelled damp like old concrete and wet wood. The chanting was louder now, but it still had that distorted quality, like it was stuck in an echo chamber. I descended slowly, one step at a time, shining my light on each step before putting weight on it. The walls were made of stone. Some parts were cracked, and water dripped here and there. My phone light flickered, and for a second, the basement went completely dark. When the light came back on, I saw shapes on the walls. They looked like stains or patches of moss. I moved closer to see if they were holes or something worse. I reached the bottom of the stairs. It was a wide basement with a low ceiling. The chanting was all around me now. I couldn't locate a single source. I could see old shelves against the walls. They had dusty glass jars and metal cans. Some were open and empty. Others had murky liquid inside. I didn't want to touch them. I just wanted to find a way out. I turned around, but the stairs behind me were gone. I looked up and only saw a solid ceiling. My heart pounded, and I felt a cold sweat on my back. I pointed my light in every direction, trying to find where I'd come from. There was no staircase, no door, nothing but walls. I started walking around the basement. My steps echoed on the stone floor. I saw a small archway on the far side, so I headed that way. The chanting grew louder with each step. It made my ears buzz. I wanted to cover them, but I needed my hands free to see and to keep my balance. My phone's battery was almost dead, and I was panicking. My throat felt tight and my limbs felt weak. I forced myself to keep moving. When I reached the archway, I found another corridor. This one was narrower than the one upstairs. The walls felt damp. I ran my fingers along them to stay balanced. The chanting came from somewhere ahead. The corridor twisted left, then right, then left again. I couldn't remember which direction I'd come from. It all looked the same. I saw a faint light around the next corner. It flickered like a candle. The chanting swelled, then stopped all at once. The sudden silence felt overwhelming. My ears still rang. I moved toward that light, feeling small in the darkness. My phone flickered again, and the beam got weaker. I reached a space that looked like a small chamber. A single candle sat on a stone ledge. Its flame danced, casting shadows on the walls. I saw a door next to the candle. It looked heavier than the doors upstairs. It had iron hinges and a thick wooden panel. I tried the handle. It turned without resistance. I pushed. The door opened into a hallway that didn't look like a basement anymore. It reminded me of the second-floor corridor. I recognized the peeling wallpaper. I realized I was back inside the house, but on the second floor. My sense of direction was messed up. I turned behind me to see if the chamber was still there, but the door led to a blank wall. There was no candle or anything else. I walked down that corridor, passing doors that appeared where I didn't see them before. Some were closed, some were slightly open, revealing empty rooms. The music started again, that old scratchy tune. It echoed, but I couldn't find the source. My limbs felt shaky. My forehead was damp with sweat. I wanted to run, but the floor creaked and threatened to collapse. I kept my pace slow. Each step sounded loud, and I heard those extra footsteps again trailing behind me. I reached a corner and found another staircase going down. I looked over the railing. It was dark, but I saw what looked like an exit door at the bottom. The handle was lit by a weak beam of light from somewhere. I felt a surge of relief. I hurried, ignoring the noise of the old steps. They groaned under my weight. I thought they might give way, but they held for now. When I got to the bottom, I grabbed the doorknob and twisted it. It clicked open. I stepped out and found myself back in the foyer where I'd first entered. The big front doors were right there. I tried them, and this time they opened. I stumbled out onto the porch. I took a deep breath of the cool night air. My body was shaking. My chest felt tight. I didn't see anyone on the street. I ran down the steps. They nearly broke under me, but I managed to reach the sidewalk. My phone finally died. The street was dim. The lamppost flickered, but it was enough for me to see my way. I glanced back at the house. It was completely dark and silent now. The windows were still open. I couldn't hear any music. I felt shaky, and my pulse was pounding in my ears. I took a few steps backward, then turned and walked away fast. I couldn't get down that street fast enough. I didn't call the cops or anyone else. I couldn't figure out how to explain what had happened. I walked home, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. My arms felt cold, and my gut was twisted from the fear I had felt inside that house. Even today, when I think about that old music, my skin crawls. I still have no clue what was in that house or how the corridors got so long. All I know is that I was trapped, and then I wasn't. I didn't see any people or ghosts, but I heard voices, and I felt things moving around me. I've never gone back, and I don't plan to. I can't forget the way those floors shook under my feet or the sound of that chanting. I just try to remind myself I'm okay now, away from whatever that place was. But every so often, especially late at night, I remember the echoes of those footsteps, and I realize I might never really leave that house behind.